The incident broke out in the Ophilis D0 hall at 9 p.m. Inside the hall, a voice echoed. A young man, his muscles bulging, was practicing a handstand. He was Zix, a mage, and he was blaming himself. He told himself that it was best to avoid acting on impulse. He hadn't expected Elka to be this angry. After practicing for what felt like enough time, he stopped and lowered his feet to the ground. Zix approached the window to check the situation outside, only to notice something unexpected. A figure in a black cloak, completely covered, was sneaking toward the Ophilis Hall. It was Ed Rothstaler, braving the rain to do something shady. When Ed arrived, he was assisted by a maid. He asked, "What about the other maids?" The maid answered coldly, "Except for the key staff, most of them are in the meeting room." The head maid asked them to gather to discuss something important. Six quickly pieced it together. They were planning to block the way into the hall after gathering the maids. The leader had been bribed, so everything was running smoothly. The maid led Ed inside and said, "I've also prepared the items they requested earlier." Receiving the item, a bucket filled with liquid, he didn't forget to express his gratitude. "Oh, thanks." The maid replied, "I'll just stand in the corner and observe." With that, everything was in place. The preparations were complete. He stood alone in the darkness, a bucket beside him. Outside, the sky was just as gloomy. The event taking over the Ophilis Hall had begun. Below, a deafening chorus of shouts filled the air. A crowd had gathered at the entrance, each person holding a burning torch. They roared, "We can't take this anymore." This is supposed to be a land of knowledge. At the very least, you should ensure fair competition. The representatives of the weaker faction, fired up with determination, shouted back in response. Their numbers outside kept growing, yet they had no way to get in. But there seemed to be no way forward. "Open! Door!" The doors swung wide. Those outside could hardly believe their eyes. "Oh? What?" But they didn't stop to question it. Without hesitation, they surged forward. "The Ophilis Hall doors are open. Let's go!" And Ed rushed outside. When Ed came face to face with the leader, Willain, he said, "Thank you." Willain asked Ed Rothstaler, "So, you're the one Lortell mentioned. Your face is clear beneath the rainwater." A few minutes earlier, Aid had set the maid down on the ground, hesitating. I... Now back in the present, Willain showed an expression of deep disdain and said, "I always agree with everything you say. Of course, I used to live in luxury in the Ophilis Hall, but it wasn't until I was thrown out that I truly understood how privileged I had been." Suddenly, Willain shuddered. His eyes reddened a little, and tears welled up. "I was a fool. I judged you based on stupid rumors. No one knows how good a person you really are. You've just been through a lot." Ed wasn't interested in listening to his rambling anymore, so he pushed him upstairs. "You're the one who made all this happen. Come on, hurry up and get upstairs." He said one thing, but his thoughts were different. Asterisk, "You're the one responsible for this mess. Stop talking nonsense and get lost." Asterisk. Willain didn't reject Ed's gesture. Agreed. "I leave this place to you." Willain was determined to keep pushing forward, while Ed, on the other hand, bowed his head in regret. "Willain will take responsibility for this situation. I'm sorry, little one." "Hang in there, Willain." After some struggling, the maid managed to escape. It wasn't really necessary, though. After all, her superior was in the meeting room. Alice, the head maid, who was trying to check the protective magic, was on Lortell's side. The hallway was filled with chaotic footprints. The system activated, triggering the protective magic, which was supposed to protect the students. Those inside the room started to notice that something unusual was happening. What the heck is going on out there? If we wait, everything should return to normal, right? These things blocked their way, but everything followed the script. Ed was working hard to strengthen the protective magic in every room and stayed alert. He had prepared for everything. Turning toward the source of the sound, he said, "Wow, your opening act was even more impressive than I thought." The rain-soaked feet walked on as expected. Ed Rothstaler, his smooth black hair tucked under a hood, stood proudly, pleased with his choice. "I gave this task to you. It was a smart decision." Lortell stepped onto the stage, her small shoes soaked through, complaining, "My socks are all wet. That's why I hate rainy days." Ed didn't seem to care about her complaint. He coldly responded, "So, you've been following me?" He stared directly into her eyes, accusing. She smiled when caught, then softly replied, "The Academy's people will handle them as soon as they arrive, so we need to finish before that." He casually responded, "Yeah, good luck." Suddenly, Lortell stopped. She turned around, her gaze icy, and said something unexpected. "Have you ever killed anyone?" Ed was silent for a moment, then answered, "No." Lortell smiled, but it wasn't a genuine smile. She began to speak. "I haven't either." "Haha." She continued, "But you know, the hunger, having to steal just to eat, getting chased away. I've done something like that just to survive." Lortell paused, her eyes growing deeper. "To survive, I destroyed other people's lives, and to avoid being betrayed, I struck first." She admitted, her voice heavy with sadness. I've lived a life, forgiving my own sins, believing I had no choice. Because life needs money, but honestly, I'm just avoiding the things I'm really doing. Standing on the path to wealth by stepping on people's hearts. That's how Lortell earned the title Golden Daughter. She knows better than anyone that she doesn't deserve sympathy, so she seeks it from others. After a pause in a position of conflicting goals, Lortell stood on the stairs and asked, can you sympathize with someone like me? As if haunted, no matter good or bad, people are always approached by loneliness. Through the window, the rain continued, and to escape it, people had no choice but to look for others like themselves, those who struggle in the dirt and filth. He looked at Lortell with disgust, knowing that only when they find someone to sink into this mess with them would they feel any kind of salvation. And then he answered firmly, no. She heard the answer without showing any emotion. Ed's eyes flashed as he spoke in a low voice, you have to take responsibility for your own decisions, Lortell. But of course, that person isn't me. The two of them stood in the darkness, silent as a shadow. Lortell smiled, breaking the stillness. That was a pointless thing to say, not like you at all. She gave him a knowing smile. I have things to do here, things that need to be done. There isn't much time left. Anyway, with that, Lortell turned and walked away, carrying out the mission she believed in. Ed sat down with a sigh. Phew. His eyes turned sharp. Now, Lortell will tell Alice about their upcoming plan. Ed was certain that once they disrupted the ancient defensive script of the Ophelis Hall and transferred control of the script to the representative of the weaker faction, the course of events would only escalate further. After that, Gwynplaine, who was tightly protected by the Hall's ancient defenses, would rise into the air. The immense power unleashed from the ancient script, shrouding him in a dense, ominous aura, would transform him into the fourth stage boss. The objective of this segment was clear: defeat Gwynplaine, who would lose all rationality amidst the chaos of the unraveling defensive script. Ed stretched tiredly and said, now I just have to sit back and wait for Taylor to wreak havoc here. He waited calmly in the silence, though he idly stretched to shake off his boredom. From his position, he silently guessed, asterisk, I might take a few hits in the middle of this battle, asterisk, but outside, in the dark of night, the rain kept falling without pause. He found it rather interesting. Asterisk, well, it's a necessary sacrifice, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, scene shift, asterisk, asterisk. It was still raining, but somewhere else. In the rose garden, a carriage steadily made its way down an empty road. Why would a carriage be out at this hour? Janica wondered as she sat under a pavilion watching it pass. Then she thought, asterisk, it must be someone important. Am I even supposed to be here right now, asterisk? She recalled the letter Ed had sent her. Asterisk, I have something to take care of, so I might be a little late. I'll get there as soon as I can. Would you mind waiting for me a bit? I'm really sorry. Asterisk. Then she asked herself, asterisk, does Ed even know? I mean, he left this note for me, but he's going to leave right after this asterisk. Her face grew warm with anticipation. Asterisk is he planning something special, asterisk. The golden carriage meant nothing to her at all. Janica sat there, lost in the pink haze of her own thoughts. Ed had guessed right. No matter what happened, she wouldn't leave the rose garden. What Ed didn't know was that for the past 3 days, she had been thinking nonstop about what Ed wanted to say to her. She couldn't sleep at night. She had communicated with the spirits, and although she felt guilty, she had always known about the things happening through Marilda. She found out that not only did Lucy visit Ed's tent, but there were also several others, including Princess Phomia, Belmamea, Rai, and even Lortell. The spirits shook their heads in disappointment, and coincidentally, most of them were women, which made Janica even sadder. That was why Janica could sit there so patiently, all by herself. She would wait for him, no matter how long it took. But loneliness always crept up in ways she couldn't expect. She touched the hairpin on her head and started to feel it didn't quite fit. This yellow rose hairpin feels off. A flower imitation would probably look better. Janica suddenly went silent as if she was deciding something, and she chose to leave the rose garden. If I walk quickly, it should be fine. She'll still be waiting after I come back with the new hairpin. But fate had other plans. Janica had let Ed down. She headed toward the Ophelis Hall, running through the rain. In front of the Ophelis Hall, 3 familiar figures stood, hesitating about whether they should go in. Taylor, not understanding how important the herbs were to Alvera, asked, are you sure walking in there is the right decision? Alvera immediately replied, do you have any idea how valuable the herbs in my room are? But it's better to wait for the Academy staff to handle it. Even after that explanation, Taylor still didn't get it, which made Alvera snap, shouting, the herbs will lose their potency if I don't preserve them with magic at the right time. Do you realize how that tiny detail will affect the final product? Do you understand how important this is, Taylor? Suddenly getting yelled at, Taylor awkwardly turned to Ayla for help, saying, Ayla, stop her. She's trying to rush in alone. But basically, Ayla had to give up. Can you just ignore it? Alvera is one of the top students in the alchemy program. I'm sure she can take care of herself. Anyone who knows Alvera understands how passionate she is about alchemy. She's obsessed with it. It's not her who's in danger, it's those students. They're the ones who should be worried. If she loses control, she'll attack them with any chemicals she can get her hands on. Taylor was panicking. Alvera, stop! I'm telling you, stop. But Alvera couldn't keep her cool and snapped. Enough with the nonsense. I need to get to my room on the 4th floor. Ayla asked again, just to be sure. So, you just need to get into your room, right? Once you're in, you won't do anything else, will you? Alvera confirmed. Of course, as long as my herbs are safe. Then, Alvera, clearly frustrated, kicked the door open. If anyone tries to stop me, I'll have to use force. Got it. As soon as the door opened, Alvera froze. The grand hall was now a pile of rubble, and Ed was sitting in the middle waiting. The other 3 walked in shocked by the scene before them. Alvera snapped, "You, Ed Ross-Taylor." He looked up, a faint but chilling aura of hostility radiating from him. Taylor sensed the danger and quickly stepped in front of Ayla, raising his arms as his shield. "Why are you here?" At this moment, Alvera stood silent, her sharp gaze scanning the scene. She looked down at the floor, noticing the footprints of the students who had gathered here, then turned her attention upwards. The display cabinet had been shattered, broken into pieces. She then shifted her focus forward, where Ed sat with his back to the staircase. Alvera smiled, causing the 2 people behind her to look on in confusion. "Well, this is interesting. I didn't expect this." She stood confidently, hands on her hips, facing him. "Are you going to stop us?" He stood up, coldly replying, "Sorry, but you can't go in there." Hearing the challenge in Ed's voice made Alvera chuckle with satisfaction. "Haha, this is getting fun. What if I want to go in? Do you really think you can stop me? I heard from Zix that your magic skills are pretty advanced, but so what?" Alvera dismissed him with a sneer. "You're just a rookie, barely able to handle basic spells. A second-year student, how cute." He remained seated, unmoving. The 3 of them took their fighting stances, with Alvera leading the group. She was very confident in the group's current strength. On our side, we had a swordsman capable of fighting on his own, a mage skilled in first-year intermediate magic, and me, an alchemist with top-tier abilities among my fellow students. The power gap was overwhelming. Taylor unsheathed his sword and demanded, "Why are you doing this? Ed Ross-Taylor, tell me what's going on up there." Ed didn't respond, his silence angering Taylor even more. Seeing that Ed wasn't answering, Taylor charged forward. "I have no choice but to force it out of you," he yelled as he attacked. Ed reacted quickly, throwing the chair he was sitting on at Taylor. Taylor sliced through the chair with a swift strike. Alvera stood quietly watching. She studied him, gathered her strength, and assessed that magic. It seems like a basic spell. He's a mage, so he's probably targeting Taylor, since Taylor is most skilled in close combat, right? Alvera's eyes widened in shock. He raised his hands high, gathering a massive surge of blinding green energy, then unleashed an attack called Windblade Asterisk. The strike cut through the chandelier's suspension cables on the ceiling, sending it plummeting straight toward Taylor. His eyes widened in alarm. However, Taylor had quick reflexes and dodged just in time. The chandelier crashed to the floor right after and exploded, causing a brief commotion. Out in the hallway, every room was shielded by protective enchantments. People stirred in confusion. What was that noise? Clevius sat curled up in a corner, his face filled with fear. What's happening out there? Amid the lingering dust, Taylor called out, "Ayla, are you okay?" Ayla reassured him. "I'm fine, Taylor. I just fell because of the impact." Taylor didn't forget to check on someone else. "Alvera, are you all right?" "I know it," she snapped back. "Don't bother with me." A flash of blue light flickered in front of Alvera's irritated face. A sharp slash cut clean through the strap of her bag, along with a lock of her hair. Alvera was too shocked to speak. She turned and stared at her bag. The bag, filled with chemicals, had fallen, and one by one, the vials tumbled out onto the floor. She spun around to face Ed, furious beyond words. "So, you're really serious about this? That means something's actually happening upstairs, doesn't it?" He didn't answer. In front of her was nothing but destruction. Alvera glanced at the scattered vials of chemicals spread across the floor. She dropped to her knees, reaching for one of the vials, when suddenly she heard Ed's cold voice utter 2 words. "Ignition." At once, flames erupted, blocking her from grabbing the nearby vial. Ed stood to the side, watching as Alvera knelt on the floor. Everything was happening so fast. The battlefield was set, unfolding as smoothly as flowing water. Sitting amidst the rising flames, Alvera's voice trembled with worry. "This is bad." Ed Ross-Taylor's judgment was swift and precise. He strode fearlessly through the fire, speaking as he moved. "Zix, you can't just go around leaking information like that, can you?" Then he flexed his sinewy arm and rolled up his sleeve. His expression held both danger and authority, standing amidst the roaring flames. He spoke, not just because of his mastery of magic, but because Ed Rossdale's figure flickered in the flames while Alvera Aniston collapsed onto the floor. Clutching her injured arm, she glared at Ed, frustration burning in her eyes. Asterisk, I'm the top student of the alchemy division, the team's main source of power. But the biggest weakness of an alchemist is that the fewer enchanted artifacts and potions we have, the weaker we become. Asterisk. Just then, bottles of magic-infused potions appeared. She thought to herself, asterisk, without them, our combat abilities drop even further. Asterisk. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she turned her gaze back to Ed. Asterisk, normally, alchemists carry enchanted accessories like rings or pendants as a precaution, but I never thought someone as gifted as me would actually need them. This is infuriating. Asterisk. Ed remained still, unmoving. A sudden realization struck Alvera. Asterisk, don't tell me. He planned for this from the start? Asterisk. She pieced it together. Asterisk breaking the chandelier and using the flames to create a wall of fire. It was all the coming off from my supply bag. Asterisk. Her eyes widened in shock as she looked down at her side, the spot where she kept her items. Alvera frowned, angry. No, that you should have aimed for the bag, not the strap. That doesn't make any sense. She continued watching S, who was gathering energy into a glowing sphere in his palm. She was quite surprised by Ed Rossdale's power. Without hesitation, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small magic stone. Frustrated, she threw it to the ground, and in an instant, it transformed into a spirit, a winged rabbit. I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. Determined not to lose, she infused more power into the spirit, forming a magical pattern beneath it. I'll grant it fire resistance and berserk combat abilities. Then, I'll strengthen it even further. Immediately, the small rabbit spirit transformed into a massive beast. Meanwhile, Isla was panicking, unsure which spell to use. Which one can put out the fire? In her panic, she hastily fired a spell at the flames, but instead of extinguishing them, it caused an explosion. Terrified, Isla stumbled backward, screaming. Out of nowhere, a golden sword slash cut through the air. It was Taylor, who swiftly struck down, suppressing the explosion. He shouted, "Get a grip, Isla." Isla narrowly escaped, gasping for breath in shock. She was quite confident in her knowledge of magic, but her combat skills were only average compared to other first-year students who had just started learning basic spells. At that moment, Taylor was still swinging his sword, protecting her. The enemy was blatantly targeting them. Aya is making me defend her, and I can't get close to him. No, just moving through these flames is already tough enough. Alvera's voice rang out as she called, "Taylor." Taylor turned to look at her. "If you can corner him, I can take him down, right?" Before Taylor could respond, she immediately took a stance, preparing to attack. "Then watch this," she shouted, summoning a fierce spirit rabbit that lunged forward. The spirit rabbit shot through the air, letting out a mighty roar that made the surrounding flames flicker. Seeing this, Taylor gripped his sword tightly, ready to charge. "There's no time to hesitate. I have to rush in now," Alvera said, pulling her cloak around her. "Yes, good idea." She ran quickly, throwing herself into the flames without hesitation. Seeing this, Ayla gasped and called out her name, Alvera. Alvera found her things and immediately tossed aside her cloak. It turned out to be bottles of magic potions. Alvera gently caressed them. "My dear ones, do you remember me? Though we must be apart for a moment, I miss you all so much." Turning toward Ed, he had a cold expression, his hand still holding the energy sphere aimed at the rabbit spirit. But in the blink of an eye, Ed changed direction and threw it toward Ayla. Alvera, still holding a bottle of potion, thought to herself, "He's also preparing to seal the deal, but now I can use the potions." Without hesitation, she threw the potion bottle toward S, and Ayla shouted loudly, "You've made a mistake." In that instant, just as the sword strike was about to reach Ayla, the potion bottle intercepted it. The bottle shattered into pieces, releasing a special potion made from walnut flowers, small brown sand mushrooms, and a spell to unleash magic. In an instant, the vial of magical elixir exploded with a powerful blast. Its effect was immediate. The explosion restored Ayla, granting her control over limitless magic. A chilling gust of ice swept through, extinguishing the flames and reducing them to ashes, temporarily halting the magical derivatives in their tracks. However, in stark contrast to these favorable outcomes, the spirit rabbit was pierced through the heart by Ed's sword. Seizing the opportunity, he used the lifeless body of the spirit rabbit as a shield against the incoming icy wind. Alvera's thoughts raced. "Do you know what this means?" Ed tossed the rabbit's body to the ground. Though there was no light, his aura alone illuminated his face, revealing a deadly expression and piercing blue eyes fixed on them. What happens when a great mage suddenly loses the ability to use magic? Alvera and Taylor shouted in unison, "What are you talking about?" We have a warrior on our side. Realizing the situation, Taylor immediately turned and fled. The others chased after him, but he quickly changed direction. Ed clawed at the wall and, with a swift motion, brought it crashing down to block their pursuit. High above, a barrel of oil, knocked loose by the impact, tumbled downward. Then the oil from the barrel spilled out, creeping closer to the fire. Finally, the oil reached the flames. Of course, oil meeting fire was like a fish meeting water. It triggered a massive explosion, sending everything flying and forcing them to stop. Taylor, his hands slick with sweat, wondered, this smell, is it oil, Seeing Taylor frozen in place, Alvera shouted, "Are you insane? This is the Ophilis Hall. If the fire spreads to the hallway, someone is bound to get hurt." Taylor, gripping his sword and ready to draw it, responded, "Whether it's magic fire or oil fire, I can cut through both with an elemental slash. Potions have their limits. They only last a few minutes at most." With that, he took a stance, preparing to lunge forward. Then he shouted, "Before anyone gets hurt, I have to put an end to this." Suddenly, Alvera stopped him. "Wait." She started scanning the surroundings, piecing things together. The window was open just wide enough for the smoke to escape. Even the carpets and other flammable objects had disappeared. She turned to look at Taylor, who was swinging his sword fiercely to put out the fire. Continuing her thoughts, he had planned for this step. Alvera, terrified, tried to stop him. "No, Taylor," she called out, but it was already too late. At that moment, Ed had drawn his bow and aimed it at Taylor. Holding his sword, Taylor dashed toward Ed. He didn't expect me to know how to use a bow, Taylor thought. He knows how to use a bow, but can I stop this arrow? Suddenly, Taylor's eyes widened with suspicion. Ed had already released the arrow. The arrow didn't target Taylor. It flew past his shoulder, heading for the person behind him. Wasn't he aiming for me? Taylor wondered. But to his surprise, Ed's target was Ayla. She gasped and raised her hand to shield herself, but it was too late. Green electric currents surrounded her hands. Ayla couldn't cast her basic defensive spell in time. Ayla was stunned, frightened, her eyes wide in terror. They yelled her name, Ayla. But fortunately, someone had cast a spell just in time to stop the arrow, enveloping it before it could reach her. Ayla still had her hand raised to protect herself. The user was still drawing energy from the sphere, letting out a relieved sigh. That was close. It turned out to be Alvera. She collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily in relief. That sphere is the claw hand, a magical tool that creates force to hold small objects from a distance as long as they're within the caster's control, she thought, still surprised. But that arrow. Alvera wiped the sweat off her forehead, staring at the arrow's tip, which had been wrapped in thick cloth, forming a round shape. This is just a stick with cloth wrapped around the tip. What kind of crazy trick is this? She turned to Taylor, panicked. Wait, Taylor, be careful. He's definitely hiding something. Before she could finish, Ed and Taylor rushed into battle. Ed used his bow to block Taylor's sword, giving him a sharp glare. A loud noise came from somewhere, probably from the second floor. Alvera's voice rang out again. Run, or we're all going to die. Act 2, final chapter, the Ophilis Hall. At this moment, Clavius was holding his head in pain. The gloomy Clavius had escaped. Back with Ed, he was breathing a sigh of relief. Phew. Finally, while Ed was distracted, tear struck, sending Ed crashing into the wall, dust and smoke filling the air. Everilla, witnessing this, was shocked and exclaimed, "What? How the heck?" At that very moment, Ed was slumped on the ground, covered in wounds from the impact, with a large crack forming on his body. In the chaotic, broken room, the fire still burned. Taylor spoke up, "Are you crazy?" He grabbed Ed by the collar in anger. "There must be a reason you did that." Alvera gritted her teeth, feeling extremely frustrated. It was as if he was completely outplaying them. If he really wanted to defeat us, he shouldn't have shown himself and destroyed the chandelier to cause a distraction. But he appeared right in front of us to block our way. Even during the fight that followed, he stayed unnervingly calm. There's definitely something strange going on. Despite being grabbed by the collar, Alvera remained unfazed, her face emotionless as she asked, "Are you done?" As soon as she finished speaking, Taylor threw him to the floor. Ed said, "Now go upstairs, stop messing around." The group stared at each other confused. "What are you talking about? You've been blocking our way this whole time, and now you're saying crazy things." Outside, the rain was pouring down in sheets. Ed glanced at them with half an eye and said, "Why are you holding back your strength like this?" At Alvera's question, the group was shocked. "Ayla, what are you saying? Hold him back? To fight us?" Alvera stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Ed's as she demanded, "Yes, I can't let this go. Answer me quickly, why aren't you using all your power?" Their gazes locked, filled with hatred and anger. Suddenly, the door creaked open and a faint light filtered through. The girl had taken a flower on her own and pinned it into her hair. She appeared, removing her cloak. After staying up all night thinking, Who could blame the innocent girl? She walked away, leaving droplets on the floor. Even if it was just an illusion, anyone could imagine a perfect future for themselves. But illusions and reality are brutally different. Alvera grabbed Ed by the collar, even though Ayla tried desperately to stop her. Taylor, furious, slammed his fist into the wall. The young man, who seemed poised to walk into a garden of roses with a charming appearance, was ambushed by a group of people. He sat helplessly on the floor, his face covered in blood. At that moment, some kind of miracle caused his face to be stained with blood as well. A voice called out. He turned to look, and the voice continued. "What are you people doing?" A girl glared at them, her eyes full of murderous intent. "What do you think you're doing?" As night fell, a voice echoed from within the Ophelis Hall. "If it goes on like this, I'll be there soon." The group had made it to the second floor. Clevius was grimacing. Taylor McClure, holding a rope, stepped down hard on Clevius, causing him to wince in pain. They had caught Clevius, who had been trying to flee on the second floor, defeated him, forced him to join their group, and then moved on to the third floor. Maid Kelly had tried to stop them, but they quickly overpowered her, defeating the boss of the third floor, the washing machine Kelly. Facing the group, Kelly, covered in wounds, spoke weakly through the pain. "I'm so sorry, Miss Alice. I couldn't fulfill the task you entrusted to me." Without her twin sister, she was no match for Taylor's group. Of course, Taylor and his team hadn't realized that one of the twin maids was acting alone. Because of that, they had managed to reach their target, Ophelis Hall, 4th floor. Leading the way, Taylor McClure and his team advanced to the next floor far more easily than expected. First, flames roared fiercely around Ed Rothstaler. He clenched his wrist tightly, his gaze growing colder. Strangely, the first floor had been far more difficult than anticipated. Lortell's eyes were vacant, filled with fear as a loud scream rang out. Then, a surge of red flames suddenly erupted. A voice echoed again, "Run!" And in an instant, the group scattered in all directions. In the chaos, a scream suddenly rang out, "Ah, help me! I can't control it, help me!" Willane was trapped in a glowing red magic circle, shouting endlessly. He was the boss of the 4th floor. Willane was being controlled by a defensive spell. This was all part of Alice and Lortell's plan. They had left behind a crystal orb to activate the magic circle management system in the control room. The defensive spells were etched all over the Ophelis Hall. The crystal orb emitted bright golden sparks through small holes placed across the surfaces. It had originally been designed to protect the students from external threats, but in the current situation, the sparks seemed like they were sealing the crystal orb, merely a child who had lost control due to magic that the Academy's spells were too powerful for him to manage. Taylor McClure's root kept fighting against the powerful sparks. The building seemed to be sinking deeper and deeper. Ayla Triss was startled and shouted, "What's going on outside?" Clevius Northendale urgently replied, "If this keeps up, the building is going to collapse." "Ah, where are the maids and what the heck are they doing?" By now, the students of Ophelis, who had been trying to stay calm, were calling out to each other, "We need to get out of here now." Next, they began using their abilities to find a way to escape. As the situation reached its breaking point, the group didn't hesitate and jumped out of the window. From the outside, the building was steadily sinking, with powerful explosions shattering all the windows on the 4th floor. Things quickly got worse and spiraled out of control. The explosions grew louder and stronger. Taylor McClure raised his sword and loudly asked his companion beside him, "Alvera, do you have any more night butterfly flower reagent?" Alvera, looking tense, explained, "The night butterfly flower reagent only distorts the user's magical power. It won't work on a magical circle like in this case." With that, she pulled out a vial of blue liquid and continued, "In an enclosed space, this will definitely be useful. This is anglerweed reagent, a mixture of anglerweed seeds and emperor clamshells." After speaking, Alvera clenched one hand and, with her other hand, poured the anglerweed reagent in response to Taylor McClure's urgency. After a series of quick movements, she said, "This should be enough to block all the basic magic down the hallway. They're all support spells. There's a lot of them, but I can still handle it." Clevius Northendale was left speechless, listening in shock. Anvia gritted her teeth and continued, "So, you don't need to worry about this side. You two go ahead and can defeat Willane." With that, she kicked Clevius Northendale out of the way. Tears welling up in his eyes, he quickly ran off, followed closely by Taylor McClure, who was holding his sword and chasing after him. As they ran, Clevius shouted loudly, "Why me? Why does it have to be me?" At the same time, Willane, surrounded by magical barriers, was shouting, trying to push all of his power to its limit. From a distance, he appeared to be floating in the center, where the red light of a crystal sphere gathered. Dark winds surrounded him on all sides. As he noticed someone approaching, sparks of red energy shot out violently. Willane's tears suddenly began to flow. One side of his glasses had shattered, but it didn't take away the joy on his face. His eyes were wide open, tears streaming down both sides of his cheeks. He joyfully spoke, Ah, finally. At the same time, a loud explosion went off. A massive fire engulfed the entire fourth floor. The building was burning fiercely from the outside, while the rain continued to pour down. Ed Rossdaler and Janica were standing not far from there. Janica looked at Ed Rossdaler with concern and said, "Ed, what are you doing? If you don't stay still, your wounds will tear open again." The two of them were standing behind a tree. Even though Ed Rossdaler was covered in injuries, he remained focused on the building. He then replied indifferently, "It's not that bad. Most of this blood isn't even mine." Janica sighed in frustration. "You're unbelievable." Taylor let out a deep breath and muttered under his breath, "Damn it." Through the rain, a group of people dressed in black coats stood respectfully by a wooden carriage. The scene looked simple and unassuming, without any exaggeration. From the outside, the carriage seemed to belong to someone noble, someone of high status. But when you consider the person sitting inside, even the carriage itself appeared low-class and cheap. When the man stepped out, it was Golden King Elta. He wore an expensive cloak, was covered in pricey jewelry, and held a piece of paper in his hand, his face twisted into a menacing scowl. Normally, he would be accompanied by more than a dozen carriages and followed by a whole entourage. But today he arrived alone, signaling that he wanted to act quickly and secretly. Elch is Lortell's godfather. After being betrayed by Lortell, he became a powerful figure, a key player. However, he can't appear at the academy right now. The paper in his hand was slowly burning away. No one could guess what he was planning to do. At the same time, under the rain, a maid holding an umbrella walked past Taylor and Phonia. It seems like the carriage has been stopped there for a while now. Why is he only getting out now? Is he waiting for the Ophelis Hall to be completely destroyed? When Ed saw the maid, he stared at her in surprise and thought, "Who is that?" The maid, escorted by a group of people in black, had a cold expression. It was none other than Shenny, the twin maid to the boss of the third floor, in charge of dishes, Shenny. Shenny was one of the orphans raised by the head maid Alice. Alice had been fully won over by Lortell, and she was supposed to be the boss of the third floor. Shenny held a sword with mysterious red light radiating from her body. However, the strange thing was that she was with Lortell's enemy. Shenny couldn't betray Alice, but Alice had been bribed by Lortell. But as he thought about this, the image of Lortell being controlled by Alice's sword suddenly appeared in his mind. What if Alice joins Elt's side? Ed Rossdaler continued his analysis. And what if she betrays Lortell? If that happens, there's only one possible future. The image of Lortell lying motionless flashed in his mind, silently signaling Lortell's defeat. You'll have a political conflict with Phoniet in Chapter 3, and you'll be a major supporting force in the battle against the Rare family in Chapter 4. It's still Lortell, but now it's hard for her to play the role of a mid-tier boss. While he was deep in thought, Golden King Elt stepped into the Ophelis Hall. The situation had completely changed, but what about Lortell's role now? I can't predict anything anymore. Thinking about this, Aiden Rossdaler suddenly spoke up. Janica. She heard him and confused replied, "Huh?" Rossdaler continued, "I need your help with something. It's urgent, and I can't handle it alone." After speaking, he fell silent, thinking, how should I explain this to her? Janica Failover quickly responded, "Okay, I'll help." Her words surprised him. Then she clenched her fists, her face determined, and asked, "What do I need to do?" In the dark space, a familiar image of the letter being burned appeared once again. The contents of the letter gradually became visible. "Dear President of the Elt Trading Association, Golden King Elt Ketchum, I am writing to inform you that contrary to her obedient and respectful appearance, your adopted daughter, Lortell Ketchum. Though the letter is nearly burned to ashes, the text is still legible, and it continues, revealing that she is actually plotting to betray you and take control of the Elt Trading Association. The young lady knows that you were the one who killed her biological parents." The image of Lortell shaking hands with another person suddenly appeared. Then the letter writer continued to expose Lortell's plot, using this information in an attempt to manipulate and overthrow him. Additionally, the negotiation to purchase the Sage's sealed grimoire was a trap to lure him to the Sylvania Academy. Golden King Elt and a few of his subordinates had already entered the building. The contents of the letter kept running through his mind, preventing him from responding in time to the ongoing situation at the Elt Trading Guild headquarters. I'm revealing this information to you for certain reasons. Golden King Elt's expression grew colder as the writer continued to expose more details. I have a secret document that can prove Lortell's scheme, but nothing comes for free. Miss Lortell had promised me a large sum of money. At the same time, no one knew that Lortell was being threatened by Alice's sword. The letter kept going. So if I don't receive even more money, I may switch sides and join Lortell. I'm about to go blind, and I've nearly lost all my hearing after an accident. This may be my last year as a maid. At this point, Alice's gaze grew colder. I was the only one backed into a corner, and I was the only one who knew the whole truth. It all depended on the decision I made. Alice's anger continued to grow. The green flames around her spread without stopping. The letter continued, revealing how things could either get more complicated or simpler. The contents were detailed in the attached document. What was revealed was nothing less than the names of the organizations I secretly managed: the CERN region, Crooks Orphanage, Cohelton Orphanage, Athens Crozel Orphanage in the Odell region, Alton Orphanage in the Timlo region, and the Community Orphanage. The amount of gold sent to these facilities would determine my next move. I hope you will show mercy and make a wise decision. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The letter was coming to an end. With kind regards, Alice, head maid of Ophelis Hall. Suddenly, a sharp sword was pressed against someone's neck. A voice then rang out, commanding, "Don't move." The voice continued, "Lord Elt will be arriving at the hall soon." The person holding the sword was none other than Alice. Seeing her opponent remain silent, she continued, "I didn't expect you to be someone with a cool head." The two of them stood in the middle of the wide hallway, the sword still pressed against Lortell's neck. Alice kept talking, "Miss Lortell, you said you would get revenge on Golden King Elt." Suddenly, she paused for a moment before adding, "However, you don't mind me saying, I don't think there's much difference between the two of you, and honestly, between all of us." Before she could finish, a loud explosion sent both of them flying. A voice echoed through the air. Someone like Winlane would never be able to reach the defense magic system. There was Winlane, tied up tightly in a thick rope, and the voice continued, "As expected, the real culprit behind this is..." The group, led by Taylor Marler, stood at the door. Alvera, leading the charge, shouted, "Head maid Elise, she's holding someone hostage. Everyone be careful." Seeing the newcomers, Lortell quickly crouched down, leaving Alice standing frozen in confusion. Clebius Nortondale saw her scrambling to the ground and urgently asked, "Lortell, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lortell replied. "Look over there, that's the one who started all of this," she added, pointing toward the culprit. Then, she bit her lip tightly and said with a strained voice, "Do we need to defeat her quickly?" After speaking, she thought to herself that she had to say this and blame Alice right away. Alvera was shocked, her eyes widening. She raised her voice and called out to Lortell, then asked, "What's with your expression?" Upon hearing this, Lortell sneered and said in a low voice, "What's wrong with my expression?" After that, Lortell covered her face with her hand and quickly ran off, ignoring the others calling her name. Lortell. As she ran, Lortell thought, "The Golden King is coming. He doesn't trust his subordinates, so he's coming here himself." She quickly ran down the stairs, her thoughts racing. The plan to bring him down and take control of my Elt Trade Association is almost complete. All the blame for manipulating public opinion and the damage caused will fall on him, forcing him to resign from the Elt Trade Association. The calculations continued to echo in Lortell's mind. Fortunately, Eltketchel hadn't arrived yet. I need to contact the operators at headquarters, send them the secret letter hidden in my room, and then I can just run off somewhere. Lortell was trying to run as fast as she could out of the hall. She quietly concluded that the key to her plan was simply not getting caught. Her steps gradually slowed down. She comforted herself, thinking, "That's enough, I can't let myself fall apart. I need to try harder." Memories began to flood her mind. The cold image of Ed Rossdaler appeared, making Lortell sigh. "No one understands me." She remembered the moment Alice had threatened her with a rusty sword and felt a mix of worry and frustration. If I were to betray them, I would have been prepared for this. And honestly, I've been through this kind of thing too many times. Suddenly, she stopped, her hand resting on the wall. The thoughts in her head kept echoing. "And so, my heart breaks right here, right now." With that thought, Lortell covered her mouth with her hand, her body trembling. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. She sadly thought, "It's not mine, but I've become stronger." Lortell slowly kept walking. At this point, it seemed that Lortell had made up her mind. She slowly accelerated, thinking that she needed to do everything she could, that she had to keep running. Tears kept streaming down her face. Lortell gritted her teeth, running and thinking, "I need to get to that room before Eltketchel does." Outside, the rain continued to pour. Elise confidently thought that everything would be resolved as long as she could send the letter. Meanwhile, in the main hall on the first floor, things were a mess. Golden King Eltketchel, along with his servants dressed in black cloaks, entered one after another. He frowned and then spoke in a demanding voice. "What did you just say? Student, evacuate immediately." Suddenly, a pair of legs appeared. Then the person spoke. Due to the risk of the hall collapsing, the one who had arrived was none other than Ed Rossdaler. He continued, "No one is allowed into this room for safety reasons until the professors arrive." Although he was alone facing a group of people, Ed Rossdaler stood firm, continuing, "I cannot let anyone pass." Hearing this, Golden King Eltketchel asked, "Did you receive orders from the Academy office?" Ed Rossdaler didn't even look at him as he bluntly replied, "No, we act based on our own will. Sylvania has a reward system for situations like this." He then opened his eyes and silently considered the situation. There are 3 people controlling the flow of this story. Lortell, who intends to overthrow Eltketchel. Ed Rossdaler seemed to fully understand her goal, to avenge her childhood and take the position of president of the Trade Association. The second person, Eltketchel, wants to stop Lortell's plan. What was surprising, though, was that someone had successfully bought the Asterisk Sage's Seal Grimoire Asterisk, and that mysterious woman, who was difficult to grasp. Thinking about it, the image of the young lady-in-waiting Alice stood between the powerful father-son duo, locked in a deadlock. The turning point of the story, why she betrayed them, Ed wasn't sure, but she was currently on the 5th floor with Lortell. The image of Alice threatening Lortell with a sword appeared once more. Ed Rossdaler hesitated. So what now? Should I go up to the 5th floor to stop her? But then he quickly made up his mind. No. The scene of the Taylor group standing at the door of the 5th floor was also recounted. Then he thought to himself, even if I don't get involved, she'll still run into Taylor's group just as I expect, and I'll leave that task to them. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, the intense battle between Alice and Taylor's group was ongoing. No one was backing down. Ed Rossdaler was absolutely confident, thinking to himself, they're very reliable. Recalling the battles with each member of the group, the fights had been intense, making Ed Rossdaler even more certain about his decision. Without hesitation, he explained, I've personally verified their abilities. Back to Eltketchel, Ed Rossdaler made up his mind. I'll handle this and make sure Eltketchel doesn't make it into the Ophilis Hall. At that thought, he let out a quiet laugh and continued planning. It doesn't matter what he's plotting, the events at the Ophilis Hall will go on as usual. Then Ed Rossdaler suddenly exclaimed, no way could you be Eltketchel, the president of the Elk Trade Association. He then extended his hand in front of his chest and performed a formal gesture, continuing, if a noble as distinguished as you, Lord Elty, has come all the way here, it must be for a very good reason. Eltketchel listened seriously, and Ed Rossdaler went on, but you should speak with the Academy first, so that you can be welcomed properly, according to your status. Upon hearing this, Eltketchel spoke in a low voice, I see, so you. Ed Rossdaler lowered his head, pressing his lips tightly together. Soon, Eltketchel's expression grew colder and an intense green aura of killing intent surrounded him. He then said, you're with the Lortell faction. 10 minutes before Ed Rossdaler was cornered, the large ship, its red lights flashing, was floating on the ocean. Ed Rossdaler and Janica failover stood before a large hole in the wall caused by an explosion peering inside. He looked at the people in the room and said, that's the situation outside. He then asked Zix, who was planting banana trees with one hand, so why haven't you left yet? Zix stubbornly replied, well, I can't act impulsively. Even if this whole building crashes down, I'm not going to die. He quietly mocked, so you think just because you're strong, you can do whatever you want? Elsa, also known as Frozen, is a fictional character from Disney's 53rd animated feature film. Zix flipped over and got up. His whole body was covered in sweat. And why did you put such a huge hole in the wall of my room? It's freezing in here. Are you trying to turn me into Elsa sleeping on the bed? Ed Rossdaler looked at him and silently thought, who would have guessed this guy is a magician? Zix scratched his head and bent down politely, saying, Senior Janica, I should have greeted you properly earlier. Although their relationship wasn't great because of the Glasgow incident, Janica failover pretended to be polite and replied, yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Ed Rossdaler comforted her, don't be upset, Janica. You've already completed the disciplinary action. Janica failover pretended to be grateful, saying, yeah, that's true. Thanks. Ed looked at the two of them and casually asked, by the way, are you two a couple? Jenny failover flustered and waved her hands. No, definitely not. She blushed and jumped slightly, nervously glancing at Ed Rossdaler. Hesitantly, she asked, Ed, did I make you uncomfortable? He lowered his eyes and replied, no, it's fine. It's just that he was rude first. Hearing this, Zix felt embarrassed and said, oh, I see. He bowed 90 degrees and apologized to me. Zix looked up at the two of them before turning back to the main issue. So, what exactly made you two break through the wall and barge in here? Ed Rossdaler affirmed, that's right. I need to ask you for a favor. I'll pay you later. He politely bowed to Golden King. Your Excellency, if a noble as distinguished as Lord Elt has come all the way here, it must be for an important reason. But you should speak with the Academy first to ensure you're welcomed appropriately for your status. His voice grew more serious as he spoke. I see. The man glared at Ed Rossdaler with a sharp, icy gaze. His voice dripped with menace as he emphasized each word. You. A powerful aura radiated from him, overpowering Ed Rossdaler, who was from the Lortell faction. He lowered his head, leaning in close to whisper in his ear, has her beauty sparked something in you? Instead of staying loyal to the gold coins you might never receive, you should seize the immediate benefits in front of you. His amber eyes showed no sign of emotion when he spoke about his own flesh and blood. That girl was born with the blood of a fox. She's the kind of person who will stab you in the back the moment she gets the chance. I, her father, the one who raised her from childhood, understand her better than anyone else. He tried to convince Ed Rossdaler. I'll give you double what she promised. Now, get out of my way. Ed kept his head down and spoke quietly. I appreciate your offer, but his deep ocean blue eyes met the man's, unwavering. I haven't received a single gold coin, so what does it matter if it's double or triple? The man's face darkened. Fine. The soldier drew their swords and, following his command, surrounded the two of them. Looks like we're not on the same page. Ed shot a glance at the soldiers as the man ordered. Take care of this quickly. Ed Rossdaler quickly fled from the soldiers wielding swords. Immediately, two soldiers stepped forward to block his path. Where do you think you're going? One of them demanded. A surge of green magic set the two soldiers flying away from Ed Rossdaler. Zix extended his hand, casting a spell, with Janica following closely behind him. Are you okay, Senior? She asked. Ed Rossdaler turned to look at them, speaking urgently. Once I assess the situation, I'll be back. Please buy me some time. I'll repay this debt later. Janica activated her magic. Got it. Zix agreed readily. Didn't you owe me something from before? He frowned, showing clear impatience. Despite still being a student, they were still formidable opponents. Charge, he ordered. Zix and Janica rushed into battle with the soldiers in cloaks wielding swords. Ed Rossdaler took advantage of the chaos to escape. He quickly formed a plan in his mind. Right now, he needed to find Lortell and update her on the situation outside. As he was running, he stopped short when he spotted Lortell Ketchum. He approached her and asked, Why can't you go outside? Lortell Ketchum hesitated before answering, Well, he extended the invitation to her. We should go around the window and sneak out first. You still have the strength to run. Follow me. Kindness and trust often go hand in hand for a reason. This was why Sharo, the receptionist at the Elk Trading Company, treated Lortell so kindly. The elderly servant smiled warmly and bowed, hoping Lortell might accidentally reveal some confidential information. This was also the reason Kaden, another employee at the trading company, seemed especially happy around Lortell. The big bearded man laughed cheerfully because Lortell had given him advice. The little green bird perched on his index finger. The reason Teeny, the pet bird who was always around Lortell, stuck close to her was because she fed it premium food. Every gesture of kindness, like the coin engraved with a sailing ship, had its reason. Just like the value of money, at least in Lortell's world, everything had a cause. Ed Rossdaler didn't seem to have time for me to explain everything in detail. But Alice betrayed you, right? Lortell Ketchum gritted her teeth, remained silent, and blamed herself quietly. It's my fault. A stupid mistake. Lortell thought back to her childhood, growing up in a home filled with love and care. She treated the world with that same love and attention. The image of Janica Failover smiling while holding a basket of eggs came to Lortell's mind. Janica Failover was very different from her. She remembered the day she made a proposal to Ed Rossdaler, a moment Lortell would never forget. Lortell recalled the way Janica Failover looked at Ed Rossdaler. Her gaze passed over him, full of longing, as if she didn't expect anything in return. The girl with white hair lowered her eyes, standing behind her. Lortell wondered if she could ever have a relationship like that. The girl with white hair held a sword close to Lortell Ketchum's neck and said, So, you told Alice the whole plan. Lortell took a step forward, knowing she would never forget that dark, ugly side of herself. The cracked glass reflected her grim face. Lortell didn't fool herself into thinking she could ever be some romantic version of herself. She thought about the things she had done. The 5 people she had bribed to take control of the Ophelis Hall, including the head maid Alice, the twin maids Shenny and Kelly, the representative of the weaker faction Willain, and the fallen noble Ed Rossdaler. And then Lortell finally understood. Alice, Shenny, and Ken are already with Elp. Willain will probably take his side too. She glanced at the young man in front of her and mocked herself. And him as well. In the end, Lortell spoke up. I'm sorry, Ed. Honestly, I don't even know what I want. Why did I say that? Why did I? Her face seemed to have lost all hope. She continued, I'm not sure if I can give you the 20 gold coins I promised. As you can see, things aren't exactly stable on my side. Given the situation, I don't think you should stay with me. But Ed Rossdaler's response caught her completely off guard. He asked, Who even asked about your situation? Then he grabbed her hand. Why are you stopping? We're in a hurry. If Elk catches you, your life is over right then and there. The light shone on their backs. If you want to accomplish anything in the future, you have to escape first. Lortell stared at him in confusion, his kindness, his trust. She looked at him, standing in the brilliant light. Now, explain everything to me. Why did you do it? She pursed her lips in silence, often accompanied by a deep thought for a reason. If the reason is unclear, then trust should be withheld. Of course, that was the truth of her life. Lortell finally explained everything. The central office of the Merchant Guild planned to manipulate prices, and it's likely that your father is behind it. She described his weapon storage. You know, the prices of equipment have dropped since the monster attack in the Eastern Mountain Range. By buying up all the remaining gear and holding a monopoly, he can trade internally without stopping and manipulate prices on everything. Ed Rossdaler understood perfectly. This was his illegal operation. She already summarized the rest. She quickly went on to explain something she had discovered. What? Oh yes, my father needs money to carry out his plan. He said he found someone willing to pay a high price for the sage's sealed grimoire. That's why he sent me to Sylvania to steal a book. At this point, Taylor interrupted. All right, no need for more details. By now, he had gathered all the information he needed. Money laundering transactions were a classic tactic for artificially inflating market prices through three traders, A, B, and C. These individuals would monopolize cheap goods in the market and trade them amongst themselves. He mentally sketched out an up and down diagram in his mind. However, money laundering transactions relied on mutual trust. If B and C secretly unloaded goods onto the market, the prices would drop immediately. So A, who had endured to monopolize the goods and taken out loans to buy equipment, would be affected. Ed Rossdaler seemed to foresee how quickly wealth could rise and fall. Elp would bear all the losses alone and be pushed out of his current position. Later, he had bought dozens of other companies corresponding to B and C over the years to set up for this plan, but then he saw that, despite this, Elp would have to leave the central office so that the 6 shareholder traders could gain the right to sell, and among them was Lortell. As he ran, he said, "You raised the scale of the Ophelis Hall takeover to pressure the finance office and to make the deal for the purchase of the sage's sealed grimoire happen. Your plan was to use that to kick L, who's desperate for money, out of the central office and sell off the equipment there. Am I right?" Ed Rossdaler's understanding left Lortell stunned. She thought to herself, asterisk, how the heck does he? Asterisk, Ed Rossdaler glanced at her and quietly said, "Then you just need to do one thing." She was skeptical, hardly believing it. He had grasped the situation so easily and then suddenly asked, "You're trying to find a way to send that secret letter to the central office of the trade guild and tell them they need to sell the equipment immediately, right?" Lortell understood now. Her room had a messenger pigeon. She remembered it. It was directly connected to their internal communications at the trade guild's central office. If she sent the pigeon and kept it hidden until the equipment sale plan succeeded, she would win. Still, she wasn't entirely sure, but surely her father had guessed part of it. He probably planned to make her reveal everything, the full plan, and all the people close to her. Ed Rossdaler suddenly fell silent. He turned away, then spoke sharply. The heavy rain outside blurred the view. Tell the coachman waiting outside to take the empty carriage to the island. Tell him to leave the carriage somewhere safe and then go somewhere else. That way, they'll think you've left Arkan Island. Lortell couldn't believe it. Then what about me? He looked at her and continued, "I've built a small shelter in northern woods. You just need to stay there for 3 days. He asked again, "I'll go to your room and leave the letter with the messenger. As long as the message says something like sell immediately, everything will be settled, right?" She hesitated before answering, "Yes, that's right." Suddenly, his eyes widened. Ed Rossdaler quickly grabbed her by the shoulders. He whispered, "Someone's at the back door. I'll handle them and then run to your room. In the meantime, keep a close eye on everything around you. If you don't see anyone, head straight to Quarters District." Lortell stood frozen for a moment, acting like a seasoned businesswoman with no unnecessary movements or gestures. In fact, she began to believe she could trust him completely with everything. Ed Rossdaler frowned and asked, "Are you really okay? Why do you look so lost? This isn't like you at all." She snapped out of it and replied, "Yes, I understand." Unable to hold back, she whispered to herself, "Senior Ed, this time it should be fine." Lortell asked, "Why are you helping me so much?" Ed Rossdaler didn't know how to answer. Why was she asking that? He turned to leave, saying, "Because I want to help you, I guess." The door closed in front of Lortell. The silence of the night settled in. Exhausted, Lortell collapsed into a seat, her face flushed and her breath coming in short, quick gasps. She heard a loud noise, the final battle between the Taylor group and Alice. Then she shook her head. "No, it's actually more like the fight on the first floor, right?" She clenched her fist and thought, "It's not just close. I can't believe it." But her face was soaked with tears of she didn't remember when it started. This was the beating of her heart. Outside, the rain fell cold and relentless. A cold voice echoed, "I don't think Ed here is the one who came out of that." The person who arrived was the dishwashing maid, Shenny. Ed Rossdaler wiped the blood off his lip, making one last effort. Well, I guess there's a little truth to that. His eyes were icy as he added, "Pitiful." Now, the tragic story was finally nearing its end. She had connected with the magical defense system of the Ophilis Hall. The finely crafted metal box emitted light from its core. It was surrounded by a magical seal that wrapped around Elis's hands and the box. With swordsmanship that rivaled the close combat students, Alice held a sword in one hand, blocking Taylor's attacks. With the other hand, she used magic to unlock the box. Despite this, she still firmly blocked every strike from Taylor. Streams of light shot out as their magical forces collided. She even mastered intermediate-level magic. Alice's gaze was sharp. She was the head maid, Alice. However, Taylor suddenly jumped up, dodging Alice's magic. He channeled his magic into his sword and leaped down from above Alice. She didn't stand a chance against Taylor because he was the main character in this story. The two swords clashed and a blinding surge of magic shot out in all directions. Taylor pushed down hard on his sword, forcing it toward Alice, but her expression remained cold and composed as she calmly withstood the force. Chapter 2, Part 3, the final battle against the head maid Alice. The magic light from the two of them lit up the entire room, spilling out through the windows. Outside the building, the sounds of violent clashes echoed. As raindrops fell onto his sword, Snai, with his sharp gaze, held the sword in one hand, pointing it at Aid. And Ross Taylor was badly injured, but he still had to face Shenny. Under the heavy rain, the water washed away the blood from the wound on Ed's head. He focused, trying to assess the situation. Ed was cornered. I'm running out of mana. I only have enough strength left for 2 or 3 basic spells. Shenny suddenly dashed forward with lightning speed. Moving in a zigzag pattern, she leaped, leaving behind trails of light and purple magic, closing in on Ed. But as she reached the final step of her jump, she arched her body, swinging her sword closer to him. The cold, sharp blade rushed toward Ed, but he quickly dodged the first strike. She was taken aback that he could avoid her blow. What's aiming for the area between my lower stomach and thigh? Ed lifted his foot and stomped on the blade of her sword. I know this trick already. The issue isn't how fast her reflexes are. Her face twisted with frustration as she lifted her skirt, revealing a series of daggers wrapped around her thigh. Ed swiftly grabbed Shenny's wrist, stopping her from pulling out the daggers. It's that I've already seen it coming. Ed Ross Taylor forcefully knocked the daggers away. Shenny, now under control, looked irritated. Ah! Her eyes suddenly widened, her purple pupils shrinking. It was the special ability of the twin sisters, those born with the blessings of the stars. The skill-sharing system allowed the twins to exchange abilities with each other once a day. Suddenly, the daggers covered in purple magic shot up and flew toward Ed. It was Kelly's low-level weapon control spell. The daggers closed in on Ed Ross Taylor, but he smoothly dodged, avoiding the sharp blades with ease. Shenny smiled confidently, but she started sweating as if trying to hold something back. Her eyes flashed with bright purple light. Then, all of a sudden, her pupils returned to their natural golden color, and her face showed disbelief, her mouth falling silent. Though Even avoided most of the daggers, 2 still embedded themselves in his right shoulder and side. His cold gaze locked on Shenny, who was kneeling on the ground, her arms twisted behind her as he held them in place. His magic wasn't as elaborate as Kelly's. He pulled the dagger from his body, blood splattering from the open wound. The only damage he took was a little blood. He tossed the daggers away, their light clatter echoing softly. Then, he slammed her down into the ground. He kicked as if to strike Shenny directly, but instead, he knocked her sword out of her hand with his foot. He bent down to look at Shenny and said, right. Pinned to the ground by Ed, Shenny screamed in anger. What a fool. It didn't even take a minute to control her. Even so, Shenny still struggled to break free from Ed's grip. She was injured, but her determination for Alice burned bright. Now that it's come to this, I can't let Alice be disappointed. Move out of the way. Aid calmly wiped the rainwater off his face, which mixed with the blood that remained. He said, Alice will lose. Shenny shied an angry look and shouted, What do you know? What do you know about Alice? Blood dripped from Alice's lip, but she stood firm. Her hand continued to channel magic around the metal box. Do you know what Alice has been through? At that moment, multiple magical circles appeared in the air, releasing bursts of magic that shot directly toward Taylor. All the magical rays converged on one spot, creating a blinding magical explosion. The wind blew fiercely, stirring up a cloud of dust. Do you know how many orphan children she's taken care of? At that point, Ed Ross Taylor fell silent. I am one of them, he said. He had no idea about the story of the failed swordsman in Sylvania, nor did he delve into Alice's personal history. Alice was shocked, her eyes wide open, as the magical light from the explosion lit up her face. If it weren't for you, Alice. Taylor suddenly charged out of the blast, her entire body glowing with the golden light of magic, moving so quickly that only an afterimage and streaks of light were left behind. Taylor pointed her sword at Alice and rushed forward. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't even have a job. Alice, now without using any more magic, stood still, preparing to block Taylor's incoming strike. To make money, Alice froze. Or maybe I wouldn't even be able to survive in this chaotic kingdom. Startled by the overwhelming power rushing toward her, her eyes widened as Taylor's magical light shone through her pupils. Behind Ed, the room where Taylor and Alice were fighting suddenly exploded. Flames shot out from beneath the pouring rain, creating a blinding scene that lit up the sky. You don't know. Even though he had heard everything, Ed said calmly, actually. As soon as he finished speaking, Ed tightened his grip on Shenny, forcing her down to the ground. He put all his strength into it, knocking her unconscious. It's not my job, but my feelings remain the same. Shenny slowly stopped resisting, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. She gritted her teeth, unwilling to accept it. I won't forgive you. I can't trust you. On Lortell's side, Ed Rossdaler, Shenny passed out, but the tears kept falling, her face full of despair. Smoke rose from the room in the building. It's a shame, but I don't know anything about the side stories of the plot. Ed Rossdaler left Shenny unconscious in the rain. What did she expect from me anyway? From the very beginning? Avoiding Shenny, the flashes from the explosion illuminated one side of his face. His eyes grew colder. There were so many stories in this world that weren't part of the game. Once again, the room was blown apart. Weighing the damage from this incident compared to Alice's efforts, it doesn't really mean anything. Ed dragged Shenny through the rain. The path he pulled her along, leaving long streaks of water. Is it just about judging right and wrong? The people who can make their own philosophy and decide their own lives. He leaned her against the wall in the building. They're living a comfortable, prosperous life. After all, the choices and ultimate goals of his life since entering this body. Ed Rossdaler ran into the rain. Not once has it changed. Not even once. Raindrops hit his hair, running down his chin, his face emotionless. It's simply about survival. The notification appeared. You have defeated Shenny, the dishwasher, and unlocked a new skill. A display with a flaming skull emblem showed the information for Resilient Heart, a skill that temporarily allows you to forget pain and stop draining health. Ed smiled with joy. Finally, I've learned this skill. Someone threw a stone, shattering the glass door. Fragments of glass scattered everywhere. Ed Rossdaler quickly jumped into the building through the broken door, crouched down, and carefully looked around. The wooden interior here was luxurious, with many decorations. In front of him was a beautifully arranged bookshelf, neatly displaying clocks, mirrors, and candle holders. At a glance, it all seemed a bit excessive. Documents were scattered all over the desk, along with a pen holder, an ink bottle, and papers, with books perfectly organized on top. After observing, he muttered, "That's definitely her personality." Ed Rossdaler grabbed a pen and a sheet of paper from the desk and wrote a note. Elt is in Sylvania. He won't be back at headquarters for at least 3 days. Sell off all the equipment at the headquarters immediately. The pigeon flew through the rain, heading toward the night sky. It would return carrying Elt's severed head. Drops of blood fell to the ground below. Ed Rossdaler pressed his wound, struggling with each step as he moved forward. He gasped for breath. The blood from his injury had soaked through the shirt he was wearing. Ha ha! From what I've learned, injuries like this will heal quickly. If it were for Janica and Zix, things would have gone exactly as planned. Elt's magical crown burned with a fierce fire. With a cruel gaze, Lortell had surely thrown himself into a disastrous end. But now the carriage, following Lortell's instructions, sped through the rain. It had escaped from Arkan Island. Elt wouldn't sit idle, and even if he managed to capture the coachman and force him to reveal everything, by then, the bird shot through the night sky. The moonlight seemed to cover the entire sky, and feathers fell softly with each beat of its wings. The letter I sent would reach the Elt Trading Guild and trigger the event that would overthrow Elt. If the plan goes smoothly, Lortell must be waiting at the cabin. Seeing what was in front of him, Ed Rossdaler suddenly stopped. Wow! In front of him, a girl wearing a black hood slowly approached. "Did you come all the way here to greet me? That's so kind of you." But then he sensed something was off about the girl. He had to admit, he'd been a bit too confident. The girl's face slowly became visible under the hood, revealing her red hair. It was her Lortell. Ed Rossdaler thought back. In this whole situation, only 5 people whom Lortell had bribed knew she was the mastermind. If Elb lost power, Alice would have no choice but to fall into Lortell's hands. Shenny and Kelly were loyal maids to Alice. Just like last time, Lortell could use money to bribe Wingland. But from Lortell's perspective, Ed Rossdaler, as she turned her back, she fell silent. Why was she a variable that couldn't be bought with money? In a remote part of the forest where no one could see, Ed Rossdaler was anxious, unsure if she would attack him, and if so, how it would unfold. If Lortell eliminated him, her perfect crime would succeed flawlessly. The true nature of Lortell Ketchum was darkness. Lortell's eyes appeared under the hood, staring at him with an unreadable expression. In her hand, she held a dagger, blade gleaming under the reflective light. She would use anyone and then immediately discard them. She was a deceitful person. Ed Rossdaler thought, if I want to survive, I have to try my hardest. He gritted his teeth, struggling to assess the situation, but with this body, she had already moved so close, standing right before him, the knife still firmly in her grasp. Ed Rossdaler froze. She swung the knife in her hand. Ed Rossdaler was caught off guard. Lortell reached for the knife, cutting a piece of fabric from his shirt. She tied a piece of cloth around the wound to stop the bleeding for Ed Rossdaler. In the end, you're hurt again. Ed Rossdaler couldn't believe his eyes as he looked at the woman standing in front of him. Was she really bandaging him up like this? Lortell helped support Ed Rossdaler, guiding him toward a wooden cabin deep in the forest. In front of the cabin, a fire crackled, lighting up the area. Let me help you. The rain stopped, so I lit a campfire, Lortell said, blushing and holding back tears as she spoke to him. First, we should warm up. In the darkness of the night, a light from the fire flickered and filled the space. Ed asked, so, did everything go according to plan? Lortell answered proudly, Senior, of course. I'm Lortell Ketchum. She was relaxing, holding a steaming cup in her hands, and told Ed, who was sitting beside her, the coachman promised me he would do his best to draw their attention and buy us more time. He didn't even care about his own life. Ed, hearing this, asked with suspicion, is he really that loyal? What tricks did you use? After asking this question, he felt a bit unsure and guessed. She wouldn't take their family hostage, would she? Lortell didn't answer the question right away. Instead, she steered the conversation in a different direction. She said, do you know what? Senior, if the plan works, I'll have a spot in the most powerful ranks of the Elp business group. She tilted her head, flashed a beautiful smile, and continued, honestly, I owe you a lot. How do you feel? Do you feel a weight on your shoulders? Don't you think I'm amazing? Eve listened to her, but didn't say anything. He just looked as usual, poking at the fire with a stick. Lortell sighed in frustration. Wow, what a boring expression. She chuckled softly and said, thank you so much, Senior. Her clear voice rang out in the quiet air. I'll never forget this favor. Taking the chance, Ed directly asked her for payment, then pay me the 20 gold coins you promised, just as we agreed. Lortell immediately laughed awkwardly. Well, about that. Sparks flew up in the air. Lortell quickly changed the subject, but there's something I want to ask you. Before she could ask, he cut her off. Is there still something to worry about? Is it about Alice? Lortell brought the steaming cup closer to her lips, her expression unclear as she spoke to deny it. No, it's not like that. From now on, I'll handle my own problems. She paused for a moment before continuing. I actually want to ask about Senior Janica. Lortell lowered her head slightly, hiding her expression, but her eyes were still probing. You're really close to Senior Janica, right? Ed answered calmly. Yeah, that's right. She's a good person. Lortell agreed with his words and started praising Janica. Exactly, and she's a senior I really respect. She's always so thoughtful, caring, and takes care of others. Ed glanced at Lortell, still not picking up on the odd tone in her voice. He asked, yeah, so what? Her lips parted slightly, and she paused for a long while. Lortell then half closed her eyes, tilting her head back with a slightly flushed face. She still held the warm cup in her hands and said, I'm not as kind as her. At the same time, in the Ophelis Hall, there was a dent in the wall, with cracks spreading everywhere. Pieces of the ceiling were falling in small chunks of brick. Amid the battle, Ulta suddenly received a report from his subordinate and quickly left. The man turned his back and walked out of the room. His cloak fluttered with each step, as if he had lost interest in the Ophelis Hall. A few mercenaries appeared, putting Zix in a difficult position. The pressure from the powerful force ahead made him raise an arm to shield himself. Sweat was dripping down as Zix said, I think you can stop now. The mercenaries were pushed back. Some immediately turned to run, while others shouted in panic, Stop! Stop it! However, for Zix, instead of dealing with the mercenaries, he had to stop his own ally. At first, Janica was a little worried. A terrifying force centered around her formed a massive red whirlwind, lifting the mercenaries into the air. Even the mercenaries couldn't handle it and called out her name, Senior Janica. But as the battle dragged on, the spirit grew stronger. Zix had to stop Janica before anyone got hurt. Zix struggled to get closer to her and asked, Is something wrong? Are you mad at me? Janica stood with her back to him, and the little fairy on her shoulder chirped twice, but Janica didn't move. She just stayed silent, holding her position. Suddenly, she turned around and smiled. Her eyes gleamed red, sending a chill down your spine. Even the little fairy perched on her shoulder seemed scared. Janica slowly answered, No, I'm not mad. Back in the present, under the clear blue sky, with the beautiful sunlight and the image of the house in Ed's mind, he sighed. Going to school was going to be tough now, especially since his uniform was covered in blood. Ed thought back to what happened. Zix had lent him a new uniform and filled him in on the news after the night's events. Winland had taken the blame for the attack on the Ophelis Hall. In his mind, he saw Winland surrounded by a red light, screaming in agony. Next, the scene shows Alice bound and with a blank expression on her face. The head maid Alice is still being interrogated, but it seems she refuses to say anything. Meanwhile, Lortell, one of the key figures in this scene, is under house arrest. Considering that, up until now, Eld's side hasn't made any strong moves, it seems the operation has been somewhat successful. Drops of water slowly run down Ed's face, which now shows a thoughtful expression. We have no choice but to wait for time to bring us the news of victory. Because of this situation, I haven't had any time to train. He lifted his head, stretched his body, and sighed. Ah. Then Ed continued to worry, thinking that his own body was also not doing well. Pain here, pain there. I can't do anything that takes too much energy, but I still have to complete the mission. A display appeared, life skills details, level intermediate craftsman, specialization woodworking craft level 13, gathering skill level 11, design level 8, advanced crafting skill slot empty. Advanced crafting skill slot empty. He started thinking about his goals. Since there's still no advanced crafting technology available, his top priority would be to learn a new technique he could actually use. He had already decided on what skills to learn. At first, he planned to start by studying Spirit Fusion, a skill that could complement his elemental mage abilities. The symbols for both skills appeared in his mind. I'll also learn magical crafting techniques for making everyday items and other gear used in battle. Spirit Fusion will be automatically learned when I form a contract with a spirit and craft an item that contains elemental power. The complete designs for those items have already been planned out by Ed. One is a sphere containing elemental power, and the other is a dagger that also holds elemental energy. He silently calculated, on the other hand, magical crafting can be learned by successfully dismantling and reassembling an item created using magic at a certain level. I don't want to waste a spirit slot, but if I want to start practicing Spirit Fusion right away, it's probably best to form a contract with a low-level spirit first. Suddenly, Janica appeared from behind, waving her hand to interrupt his train of thought. She cheerfully called out, "Hey, Ed, the rain has stopped, so it's a bit chilly, huh?" He tilted his head and responded, "Oh, hey, Janica, aren't you going to school today?" Janica sat down on a rock next to him and replied, "I have a headache, and I'm not feeling too well, so I'm just going to rest in the northern forest and enjoy the breeze for a bit." Ed, still exercising, asked with concern, "You're not hurt from trying to help me, are you?" Janica immediately shook her head. "No, not at all." Her face broke into a wide smile, but she quickly opened her eyes and glanced over hesitantly before asking, "By the way, how is Lortell? Is she okay?" Ed answered, "She's fine, just resting in the cabin." Janica quickly turned around and looked toward the cabin. Inside, Lortell was sitting comfortably, bathed in bright light from the window. She leaned her head against the wall, quietly thinking, even though the incident at the Ophelis Hall had ended, there was still so much left to do. In her mind, the image of Alice holding a sword and the image of a book appeared. First, she had to defeat the former Duchess Alice again. Second, she needed to prepare for the negotiation to buy the sage's sealed promoter. Lortell placed her hand on the windowsill and gazed outside, continuing her deep thoughts. However, for the past 3 days, as she waited for a response from the Eld headquarters, she had been living in constant anxiety inside this wooden house. But in the end, it wasn't as bad as she thought. She opened her wide eyes and looked at the figure in front of her. Lortell felt a surge of happiness, thinking asterisk because I'm here with Ed Rostaler. Asterisk. At that moment, Ed was outside of the yard, sweating as he chopped wood. Lortell's inner emotions stirred, and her heart started pounding wildly. She blushed and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His unconditional kindness and trust, which didn't need to be returned, made her feel as if she were curled up in a soft, cozy bed. Lortell's gaze toward Ed became increasingly filled with deep affection. For some, this feeling might be ordinary, but for Lortell, who had spent her life surrounded by indifference and emotional distance, this feeling was worth more than gold. She felt a bit possessive, thinking that she didn't want to share him with anyone else. Watching Janica smile and hand a towel to Ed only made it worse. Lortell emphasized more, especially that person Janica Failover, whether they're friends or family, their relationship is already built on kindness and unconditional trust, and that's just so natural and normal for them. Lortell pouted, furrowing her brows in anger. If she already had so many people chasing after her, shouldn't she let go of a few? She sat down, starting to come up with a plan. If not, she'd have to resort to some dirty tricks. Lortell crossed her legs, sitting with her back to the light. She folded her arms, closed her eyes, and lowered her head to think. This was her specialty. She raised her hand to her forehead, her eyes glowing with a hint of green. A sleek smile spread across her face. 3 days together is such a huge advantage, such a perfect one. Lortell happily waved her hand. In her imagination, the wooden house was already filled with piles of gold coins. First, I'll just do things my way. If I fill this wooden house with gold coins, then... Lortell started thinking of this idea, but immediately dropped her head, mumbling, no, that's not possible. I don't have any money left. I wonder if I could help him pay his tuition. I need to make it seem as natural as possible. Lortell started to imagine herself blushing. Her eyes also seemed to turn into hearts, but she still said proudly, don't misunderstand me. I'm giving you money for your tuition, not just because you're an upperclassman. Just as Lortell thought that, she became so embarrassed as she hit her head against the wall. She sighed to herself. That was so cheesy. Since the day she was born, her only accomplishment had been that Lortell Ketchel had never been in a relationship. Suddenly, another voice interrupted. Can you move? You're taking up my spot. Lortell, who had been banging her head against the wall, stopped immediately. She made a confused sound. Ah! Lucy walked into the wooden house, looking exhausted. She raised her hand to cover her mouth and yawned. Yawn. Lortell stood frozen, wide-eyed, and asked in surprise, Lucy, what are you doing here? Lucy entered the house, immediately lay down, pulled up a blanket, and mumbled in a satisfied tone. This place is the best. Anywhere the sunlight hits is perfect. Lortell thought to herself, what's wrong with this sister of mine? Suddenly, Ed came in and picked Lucy up. She was lifted so abruptly that she started screaming, why I? He walked outside and threw Lucy onto the rug on the ground. Ed turned back to Lortell and said, oh, sorry you're awake. Lortell, I guess Lucy came to the cabin to find a place to hide. He added, I kicked her out so you can rest easy, just like you're at home. Lortell remained silent for a moment. After a while, she suddenly spoke up and asked, it seems like Lucy comes to this campsite pretty often, doesn't she, Senpai? Ed was a bit unsure how to respond. How should I put it? Right now, I just see her as a natural disaster. Watching Lucy, who was still sound asleep after being thrown onto the ground, Lortell felt discouraged and thought to herself, another one. Ha! But I still have plenty of time. The darkness was slowly covering the sky above the cabin. Lortell made a firm decision. We'll see who wins in 3 days. The next morning, the sun had risen high in the sky. The sky was a clear blue with fluffy white clouds scattered across it. On the second morning of Lortell's life in the wooden house, she leaned her head out of the window, flashing a bright, beaming smile. Good morning, sir, she said. Even her words seemed to be carried away by the wind. Janica appeared, smiling and greeting her. Good morning, Lortell. Ed turned around and called out to Janica, oh, Janica, you're here. Seeing this, Lortell closed the window, turned her back, and sighed. Her eyes suddenly drifted to one side. When she saw Lucy stretched out and peacefully sleeping, she sighed again. Ha, she doesn't even seem to care. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Ed wiped the sweat from his face and let out a deep breath. Ha ha, it's finally done. The new product was handmade bricks. A brick was made by pouring mud into a mold to hold its shape. After the mud in the mold had completely dried, magic was used to fire it into a brick. The difficulty level of the process was rated 2 stars. A gray brick had been created, completing the crafting process. The production skill had improved, and a new skill had been mastered. Thanks to agility, proficiency immediately increased. New brick heater product, a heater made by stacking handmade bricks on top of each other. Since these bricks are connected by mud, it's not very sturdy. However, it seems to function like an oven. If used indoors, it might need a vent. The crafting difficulty is also considerable. Once the production was completed, the production skill had leveled up. A brand new stove was made and embedded into the wall of the wooden house. The heater can't be built yet because of the Ophelis Hall incident, but it has finally been finished. A little while later, beautiful, delicious dishes were laid out on the table. Lortell was so amazed that she exclaimed, wow, this smells so unique. You added basil, right? Ed replied, Belle gave me some last time. Can you tell just by the smell? Lortell proudly responded, I'm really confident in my sense of smell. Both Janica and Lortell were holding skewers, sitting on opposite sides. Lortell started the conversation. I haven't noticed anything unusual since this morning. Everything must be going according to plan. He agreed with her, but still reminded her. Right, that's good, but don't let your guard down. Lortell immediately responded, of course, Senpai, there's still a lot left to do. She puffed her cheeks as she chewed her food, then continued. There's still so much to clean up, and I also need to pay you back. Since I'm a businesswoman, no matter how small the amount is, I'll make sure to repay you properly. Lortell asked, would you prefer something other than cash? He answered right away. Right, I remember now, probably building materials, or he suddenly stopped as if he had just figured something out. No, I know what I want now. Janica, sitting beside them, remained silent, watching. He turned to Lortell and asked, what about goods created through magic? Can the leftover ones be used? Lortell repeated the question. goods created through magic. Janica just kept staring at the two of them, who were deep in their discussion. Under Janica's sorrowful gaze, Ed continued, "You can check the warehouse and report back to me later." Lortell responded, "No, let me think about it now. I've pretty much memorized everything already." It was then that Ed noticed Janica. "Speaking of which, Janica, I actually have something I need your help with." Janica blushed and immediately replied, "You need my help." Their voices echoed in the wooden house surrounded by lush trees. Ed explained to Janica, "Lately, I've been trying to learn advanced magic. I also want to try making a pact with a low-level spirit. You think you could help me with that?" Janica immediately agreed. Of course. She placed her hands on her hips, playfully saying, "Well, if that's the case, I'll be your teacher. I'll teach you. So soon enough, you'll be able to make a pact with a mid-level spirit." Janica's eyes widened in surprise, and she exclaimed, "Oh." At that moment, Janica started guiding Ed. First, she wanted to test how sensitive his spirit connection was. "Ed, can you see it, Terrace? Are you only trying talking to him?" The small voice of the spirit echoed, but when it reached Ed's ears, it became choppy. "Miss Janica, this guy, because can't." Ed stared at the spirit in surprise. "Oh, I can barely hear what it's saying." Charis didn't care about Ed's surprise and instead spoke to Janica. "First, he'll need to raise his resonance level higher to hear what we're saying." Janica replied, "Really? But I thought Ed's progress had been pretty fast already." Charis, her wings fluttering angrily, responded, "Think about how this guy is living. How much time has he even spent practicing magic?" She knew that too. During our weekly briefing at the window in the Dex lobby, there was a report saying his food stock was running low and he urgently needed to focus on building the Go house. How was he supposed to have time to think about anything else? Before it could finish speaking, Janica clasped her hands together and called back the spirit. The little bird let out a reluctant cry. "You are." She stayed in the same position, sweat pouring down her face as she asked Ed, "Do you hear that?" He was also sweating, responding, "I heard it faintly. What's the weekly report meeting about?" Janica's face darkened, and she avoided his gaze without saying anything. Lortell suddenly peeked out from behind Ed, still a little stunned. "Hey, are you two done talking?" Thinking about the storage shelves in her warehouse, Lortell added, "If you're finished, why don't we just talk about the magical items we created? It seems like there's more surplus than I thought, so I can give you even more than enough." Ed started to haggle. "Oh, well, could you sell it to me for the lowest price possible? You could use the 20 gold coins you promised and just deduct it from that." Lortell smiled with narrowed eyes, but her voice didn't sound too happy. "Sell it to you cheap? Hearing that from you is kind of upsetting. Anyway, there's not much money in it. And honestly, they're already dead assets, so even if it's free." At this point, she suddenly paused for a moment, opening her eyes and looking at Ed deeply. Lortell continued, "It's not easy, but in return, you need to come to the warehouse every 3 days. That way I can sell to you at the lowest price possible. While we're there, we can drink and chat." Her words surprised both of them. Janica's face turned bright red with anger. She stood up suddenly, holding a skewer of food and pointing it at Lortell. "Is that really so hard to make it free? Ed's done a lot for you already." Lortell calmly crossed her arms and responded, "What are you saying? I'm still a businesswoman. Giving something for free goes against my professional ethics." Ed sat between them, listening to their argument while continuing to eat. Janica, fuming, said, "Lies, you're just making up excuses." Lortell feigned innocence. "Excuse? For what?" Ed remained calm, chewing his food while thinking, "Looks like it's time for me to start learning magic techniques and spirit magic." Suddenly, at that moment, another voice rang out. "Oh my, I didn't expect to run into you, Miss Lortell, here." The three of them immediately turned to look at the newcomer. Lortell gave a questioning sound. "Sister Belle?" She stood against the light, slightly leaning forward, and politely said, "It seems like things aren't exactly calm here. I apologize for showing up so suddenly. This is Belle Maya, the new head maid." She continued, "I'm sorry, but I've come to deliver some unfortunate news, and this is a message from the new head maid." Belle's words made Lortell's expression turn a bit serious. The white cloths hanging in the sun fluttered gently in the breeze. A voice spoke. "So, what is it you want to tell me?" Clara, sweating, leaned in close to Belle's ear, appearing secretive, and said, Don't be too shocked, okay? This is highly confidential. You can't let anyone else know. And try not to look too surprised." Clara whispered into Belle's ear and continued, "It's about Janica." Clara said, "It seems like she likes Ed." Upon hearing this, Belle Maya glanced at her. Clara then clearly mentioned Ed's full name, Ed Rossdaler. Belle Maya was a bit confused and wondered whether she should pretend to be surprised. Calmly, she picked up the towel, shook it out, and said, "I see. You must really care about her, Miss Clara." Clara covered her face, showing her frustration, and said, "I just don't understand why someone like Janica likes that jerk so much. Although I have to admit, his reputation has improved a little lately. As a friend, I want to support Janica. Clara held her head in one hand, her expression shifting slightly. She hesitated before speaking again. But that's not the main issue here. Lately, Janica had been mentioning her name a lot, Lortell Ketchum. On this side, Janica failover sat with her head down, her whole body radiating hostility. Clara continued, on the first day of school, both of them were absent, and the same thing happened yesterday. Belmaya kept working while talking with Clara. Clara, still holding her head, stood next to Belmaya and said, in the end, a relationship between a man and a woman is just a game of push and pull, isn't it? If that's the case, then it looks like Janica doesn't have much of a chance. Clara added, I don't even know much about Ed Rossdaler. Actually, I find it kind of funny how she keeps staring at him like that, but he doesn't realize if he's just stubborn to the point of being ridiculous, or if he's just a hard-to-like jerk from the start. Belmaya, with a cold expression, was hanging close and said, instead of being stubborn or a jerk, I think the reason he's not interested in a relationship is because of his own personality. Clara, fuming beside her, shot back, that's impossible. I'm sure if he opened his mouth, he'd say something creepy, and then feel all proud of himself because of his popularity. He's surrounded by so many girls. Just thinking about it gives me the chills. Belmaya closed her eyes, holding the cloth in her hand, turned her back, and walked away, thinking, lucky you say. Lortell Ketchum crossed her arms and smiled, thinking, a hot-tempered stray cat just sitting in front of a fish shop. Janica failover looked up at Belmaya in her hands, holding a piece of food as if to say, Sister Belle. Belle looked down at Janica and thought of a helpless little kitten, trembling in front of a tiger. Lucy Merrill was comfortably asleep on the rooftop, basking in the gentle sunlight. Belmaya thought of a simple cat, just knowing how to sleep. Belle, dressed in a red dress, groaned while holding her head, saying, oh. Ed Rossdaler, standing beside her, asked, what's wrong? Belmaya replied, oh, nothing. I'm sorry. Just seeing everyone here has given me a headache. Lortell Ketchum turned around and said, aside from that, is there anything else you want to say? Belmaya clasped her hands and bowed, saying, I want to pass on a message to Miss Lortell. This message is from Alice, the former head maid. On this side, the campfire flickered, pushing back the darkness of the night. The flames lit up the area around them. It was getting dark, so Janica headed back to the dorm. As she walked, she glanced around. Belle had also come to pick up Lucy and was heading back. She was carrying Lucy in her arms, moving forward. From Lortell's perspective, this was an uncomfortable situation. That's because her position had already been discovered by the soldiers of the Ophelis Hall. In the dark, Ed Rossdaler was putting on his jacket and said, the uniform has been fixed, but it still looks too worn out. This should be fine. The pigeon had returned with our victory announcement. Lortell Ketchum held the paper that read, the proposal to sell equipment has been completed. The review of the proposal to remove the leader has been finished, and Eld's power has been almost completely revoked. He will definitely be eliminated. The plan is almost complete. Please report your personal status. It's time to prepare for the academy as usual. Lortell lowered her head and brought the paper close to the flame. She said, if things have reached this point, your stepfather must have returned to the headquarters for one last fight. She continued, though it'll probably be a pointless struggle. Well, at least there's no longer any reason for him to focus on Sylvania. Ed Rossdaler threw on his cloak and turned around. What are the chances Elt is still hiding something up his sleeve? Lortell looked at the piece of paper burning slowly and said, yeah, he's just as sly as you, so there's a good chance of it. But I have no choice but to trust Slob. He's aiming for the next leader of the guild, after all. The paper burned down almost completely, and her voice echoed. Our bigger concern right now is Alice. But it seemed like that issue was already settled. Ed Rossdaler asked, Alice hasn't revealed that she's behind this, right? Lortell pulled out a second letter from the envelope and replied, of course she hasn't. That's because I paid her in advance. Whether it's me or Elt who comes out on top, Alice, the head maid, will stick with the winner. Lortell held the paper in her hand, bringing it closer to the fire for better light. It was the scroll that Belmaya had brought. Belmaya bowed her head, holding a detailed list of the orphanages Alice had supported throughout her life, including the yearly maintenance costs and the methods she used to sponsor them. Alice had never stopped trying, even though her health had been declining. The students had always followed her lead. Alice stood in the shadows, her head slightly lowered, her gaze tinged with sadness. In the end, she wouldn't be able to work anymore and wouldn't be able to take responsibility for the orphanages she had helped. She had gambled her entire life on that plan. Alice, radiating a fierce energy, held her sword close to Lorteller's neck. She was blunt and showed no emotion. It seemed that no one realized how trapped she really was. One person was crying, their face smeared with dirt, biting their lip tightly to hold back sobs. At least the people following Alice understood her situation and the emotions driving her to do this. Lortell spoke. Because you were so close to winning, she wants to join your side again. But once trust is lost, it's hard to regain. She read the letter and said, this is what they sent instead of a threat. Ed Rossdaler glanced at her. In the world of merchants, there's no such thing as sympathy. Lortell quietly stared at the letter. If you made a mistake like this, you'd be seen as a fool. She probably knew this better than anyone. Lortell spoke up. Well, I think I don't want the fact that I was behind this occupation to come out. She smiled, folded the letter, and put it in her coat pocket, then said, so let's keep things smooth between us. Because in this world, there are no eternal enemies or allies. Despite saying that, she seemed relieved. Lortell stood up and said, I'm planning to leave here soon. Are you going to stop by the local branch of the guild to sign the contract? Ed Rossdaler, holding a log, added it to the fire and replied, yeah. After speaking, he handed the torch to her. Here, take this. It'll burn for quite a while. Lortell stayed silent, just watching Ed Rossdaler. He didn't know what she was thinking. He took the torch and asked, what's on your mind? Lortell answered, oh, it's just that you're taller than I thought. Tam was curious about her words. What made you say that all of a sudden? Lortell Kecklin blushed, lowered her head shyly, and said, I think this is a bit rushed, but if I want to take the place of those other girls, maybe I should do something a little bolder. Suddenly, she called out to him, Senpai. Ed Rossdaler tensed up, looking at her, and she continued, do you know, the nature of relationships between people is a game of give and take. With that, she reached out and adjusted his tie. Just like the tie, she noticed it was crooked. Ed Rossdaler looked down at her as she fixed his clothes, still holding the lit torch in his hand. If no one's around to see it, why should I wear it uncomfortably like this? Lortell smiled and said, I think keeping yourself looking neat isn't a bad thing. After all, we're both students at Sylvania. Suddenly, Ed Rossdaler stammered, what? In the moment he wasn't paying attention, Lortell pulled the tie sharply toward herself. She stood on tiptoe and made a move that surprised everyone, even herself. She couldn't believe she had done it. Under the starry night sky, the fire reflected the shadows of the two people. Lortell gently pressed her lips against Taylor's, catching him off guard. After feeling what she wanted, she pulled back. Her face was slightly flushed, and she lightly touched her lips with her hand before saying, those raspberries we had for dinner were really good, weren't they? Now that I think about it, they were pretty tempting. Ed Rossdaler turned his face away, feeling a bit embarrassed, and said, don't cross the line. Lortell responded, you're making me sad. If you push too much, it won't be good for either of us. She held the torch in her hand, her gaze full of affection. Senpai, next time, I'll make you pull me closer. I need to practice more so I can be more in sync with you. Ed Rossdaler watched her as she walked toward the forest. Suddenly, she started running a bit shy. I had been trying to stay away from getting too involved with the main characters in the story. Ed Rossdaler was silent, unable to speak because of Lortell's sudden disappearance. But, just as I had predicted, he let a soft laugh and then cupped his flushed face in his hands. Things hadn't gone the way I had hoped. The stars in the sky were still as beautiful as ever, and the moon shone brightly. In the night, the sound of insects echoed, and the crackling of the campfire remained unchanged. But I had a feeling that the story's direction would continue to intertwine and change. Ed Rossdaler thought to himself, looking up at the sky, no matter what his intentions were, he still felt uneasy. It was as if I had already started to get caught up in the heart of the story. My plan was to stay on the sidelines and watch the plot unfold smoothly. He thought again. I'll only step in when necessary. With that, he seriously opened the door and stepped inside. I'm not someone with big ambitions. I just want to graduate and improve my skills. He sat down below the window. At first glance, the plan seemed simple, but I was starting to realize how foolish and difficult it would be in the not-so-distant future. Outside the window, the sky was filled with stars and the dark night. Ed Rossdaler silently said to himself, summer is passing just like that. Outside the window, the leaves were turning yellow and fall had arrived. Under the early spring sunlight, the leaves fell in the breeze. The tail of a large creature slammed onto the ground. A voice rang out, that firefox just kissed the waiter Eid. Under the large tree, Janica sat quietly, deep in thought. Behind her, a fire dragon was lying asleep. In front of her was a blue tiger, and her reflection appeared in the water. A bluebird flew over. She couldn't ignore this. Miss Janica. Janica, startled, said, wait, what are you talking about? Did they kiss? The dragon lifted its head and added, I saw it too. That kiss was pretty intense. Youth really is something, huh? That girl who looks like a fire fox knows how to toy with people's hearts. Hearing this, Janica angrily said, what exactly are you talking about? How did you react? The dragon nonchalantly replied, oh, you're asking the right question, miss. It continued. When I observed him, it seemed like he was trying to keep his distance. The image of Ed Rossdaler that day, with his cold expression as if he was avoiding something, was exactly as the dragon described. Even though the girl kissed him, his face didn't change at all. When he saw me, he looked genuinely surprised. The dragon glanced at me as if it were proud of itself. His reaction was really cold. It made me feel awkward just watching it. The dragon speculated that he must either be a nobleman from Sa, who could be a eunuch, or he can see her as a woman at all. Hearing this, Janica let out a relieved sigh and said, "Well, that's a relief." Suddenly, the dragon shouted, "Usually, people like him are good at attacking but terrible at defense." He yelled in Janica's ear, "From my experience, a girl who looks like a fire fox will get even more aggressive the more she's rejected. If you don't do something, he'll be taken away, Miss Janica." Janica covered her ears and said, "But even so, you just said that Ed's reaction was really cold, right?" The dragon got angry and shouted loudly, "Are you really going to let that fire fox steal him from you? I heard you agreed to teach him magic. Don't waste this opportunity. When the two of you are alone, at least take the initiative and kiss him." He was so angry that the other animals had to step in to stop him. The blue leopard helplessly said, "Don't listen to Tarkan, Janica. You're at your best when you're just being yourself." The dragon, rushing in from behind, added, "Oh, if you want to show off an innocent or fresh side, that wouldn't be bad." The blue leopard spoke again. "You've probably thought about doing something new and exciting with Ed. Have you ever experienced a situation or seen something like that?" Janica blushed, turned away, and hesitantly muttered, "Eating." She shouted and fiddled with her braided hair, embarrassed, and added, "Feeding each other." The dragon and the leopard both awkwardly responded, "Ha." The scene shifted back to the wooden house, where Taylor was holding a spoon out to Lucy, saying, "Go on, say ah." She sat on the ground like a little child learning to eat, saying ah. Ed Ross-Taylor carefully fed Lucy Merrill. Suddenly, her face darkened. She exclaimed, "Ugh, gross." Inside the wooden house, her voice echoed as she screamed. Ed Ross-Taylor calmly picked up his pen and began writing on the paper, saying, "Just as I thought, without a variety of spices, it's hard to really taste much." Lucy, standing behind him, kept punching him lightly and said, "Stop using other people as your taste testers." But Ed Ross-Taylor wondered if he should put off his training until he had more diverse ingredients. A notification appeared showing his life skills details and his mid-level craftsperson status. Woodworking craft level 4, design of 9, gathering of 12, woodworking of 13, hunting of 10, fishing of 7, cooking of 6, writing of 5, advanced crafting techniques drums. Ed Ross-Taylor then mentioned his agility stat, which was also his highest as it was closely related to how skilled he was in life skills. A circle appeared with words around it listing everything he was proficient in. If I only increase one stat, the overall efficiency will drop, so I need to raise all of them evenly. The problem is I don't have the time. Under the sunlight, the classic clock tower came into view. The new semester had begun. Ed Ross-Taylor coldly held his book, with Janica happily following behind him. He thought to himself, "The time I can fully dedicate to survival activities. Even if I cut it short, it's only about 5 seconds." Suddenly, he glanced to the side. "It's time I figured out how to manage my survival activities more efficiently, because I need time to check if the storyline is progressing smoothly." On the training field, 2 people were practicing. He watched them and thought, after all, the most important characters in the story are the main protagonist and the 4 heroines. Aylatrice stood nearby, cheering for Taylor McClure. Ed Ross-Taylor continued thinking, "Taylor's in the combat department, so I don't see him very often, but it seems like he's getting stronger." His companion, Isla, was also supporting Taylor in her role. Just then, Phonia and Claire walked by. The group of Ed Ross-Taylor lowered their heads in greeting. Another thought crossed his mind. Princess Phonia seems to be doing well without any problems. It's almost time for her to have a conflict with Lortell. I need to keep an eye on that. Clar won't enroll until next year, so I don't have to worry about it yet. The situation with Lortell, the Golden Daughter, is the most unstable. I don't know what changes Elt's early elimination will cause. He thought for a moment, then waved goodbye to Lortell. Janica, who was standing next to him, couldn't help but feel jealous. He thought again. Also, it seems like her plan has changed. She's still trying to control the current mystery. Recently, I need more time. With that thought, he walked away. Standing with his back to the school's large door, he realized he still needed to check the professor's building. He glanced at the highest window of the building and thought, because the final boss of the second round is... Professor Glass spoke up, well. He held up a piece of paper and continued, "There's someone behind the occupation of Ophelis Hall. If you think so, that it's very likely to be true, because you have an unusually sharp intuition." Claire Elfin placed both hands on the table and said, then, "Assistant Professor Claire Elfin." Glass took off his glasses with a mysterious look and said, "But remember, don't overlook any important information." He set his glasses down on the table, his whole body exuding an air of intimidation as he added, "Just like the research on theology I asked you to find for me." Claire Elfin flinched and replied loudly, "I'll find it by tomorrow morning." In the Ophilis Hall in the professor's section, there was a door with strange writing on it. It was the office of Assistant Professor Claire. Inside, a voice called out, "We've gathered the information related to the Ophilis Hall occupation incident. Assistant Professor Claire." Claire Elfin was lying on a chair inside, letting out a tired sigh. "Ah, thanks, Anis." She picked up a stack of papers and began reading, deep in thought. She looked through the student information sheets, pondering. Honestly, do I really need to stress about reaching an exact conclusion? Oh my god, I'm so exhausted right now. Claire Elfin stared blankly at the pile of documents. But no matter how I look at it, there's nothing suspicious here. Suddenly, she mentioned a name. She stopped in front of Ed's information board and said, "Ed Rossdaler," when a voice echoed, "Yes, I'm really sorry, Senior Ed." Ed Rossdaler stood silently as the voice continued, "I'm so busy that I haven't prepared anything yet. Please come back next week." On the street, inside the Elk Guild shop, Sylvania Branch, a voice could be heard, "I prepared tea and snacks as an apology." Lortell Ketchum, standing next to Ed Rossdaler, said, "Also, according to the records, there are still some magical items here. You can pick them up at the counter later." Ed Rossdaler sat seriously, placing both hands on the table, and hesitated before saying, "Is that okay?" But Lortell, adjusting her outfit and brushing her hair up, replied, "Today I have an important meeting, so I dressed up a little. What do you think?" Ed Rossdaler asked, "An important meeting?" Hearing this, Lortell awkwardly went silent. She then half-jokingly said something like that. She stood near the edge of the table and asked, "Is the wooden cabin finished yet?" And Rossdaler looked at his teacup and answered, "Almost done." Lortell continued, "So I guess you're almost done with the furniture too, right?" Ed Rossdaler said coldly, "That's true, but the products from this branch are a bit too high-end and expensive for my budget. If you gave them to me for free, that would become a big problem." Lortell tightened her grip on the armrest and replied, "Because giving away merchandise for free goes against the ethics of a business person." With that, she used her strength to break one side of the chair and continued, "Your expertise is carpentry, right? This has become worthless, so I'll throw it away tomorrow." Seeing her actions, he was surprised and said, "That's a luxury item." He gently picked up his teacup and said, "Thank you." Upon hearing that, Lortell Ketchelman fell silent. Ed Rossdaler glanced at her. Lortell asked, "How is it that you can always keep that expression?" Suddenly, Lortell sat on the table. She sat on the edge, blocking Taylor's path, and said, "What I did before was already a game-changing move against you." She recalled the moment that day when their lips met under the starry sky by the campfire. Then she continued, "At first, you've been seen as a woman, did you?" Lortell Ketchel Chen gently pressed her finger against Ed Rossdaler's chest and said, "I see you as a gentleman senior, just like you think." She gazed at him intensely, her every desire carrying a deep, unspoken meaning. Ed Rossdaler replied coldly, "I don't know what you want me to say, but..." Lortell interrupted, "Oh, I'm not expecting you to respond. You know, I'd never engage in a battle I can't win. Though you remain calm now, one day." Lortell Ketchum Chen sat facing Ed Rossdaler and said, "I won't be the only one sitting here, nervous, anxious, waiting for your reactions, right, senior?" Ed Rossdaler looked at Lortell. Her smile was still as charming as ever, even though she wasn't sure if she'd win or be cornered. Her resolve remained clear. Lortell gently brushed his trembling fingers, still resting against the other person's chest. Ed Rossdaler thought this was typical of a merchant, people who never show their emotions outwardly. Outside in the schoolyard, students were moving in groups. One person raised a staff high and said, "All right." Janica raised her staff and, smiling, said, "Should we start the lesson?" Ed Rossdaler replied, "Yeah, I'm ready." Janica conjured a flame in her hand. She looked at the fire in her palm and asked, "Do you want to try focusing your magic power to communicate with it?" Ed Rossdaler looked at the fire and said, "Definitely." The flame in Janica's hand blazed brightly. From within the fire, a creature appeared. It spoke, "Nice to meet you, Master." It was Mog, a low-level fire elemental. Mog had a bright yellow body and raised its hand in a formal greeting. "It's an honor to form a contract with you, Master Ed. I am Mug, the low-level fire elemental." It stood seriously and continued. "At last week's regular press conference, we held a selection to choose a spirit to form a pact with Master Ed. I passed the first screening round, the next two interview rounds, and finally, the fourth discussion round with other spirits. Since then, I've qualified to become the spirit bound by pact with Master Aid." Ed Rossdaler stared blankly at the creature before him. Mog kept speaking mechanically. "When it comes to controlling magical energy, no one in the northern forest can match me, and I possess the best communication skills among the lower-ranked spirits." Hearing Mug's robotic tone, Ed Rossdaler broke into a sweat. Mug, still perched on Janica's hand, kept introducing itself seriously. "My heart burns with passion." "Oh, but it's already burning, isn't it?" Still, I promise I'll burn even hotter to support you with all my strength. Ed's thoughts drifted back to the time he failed as a swordsman in Sylvania. I had a period of time where I leveled up my spirit skills. We laughed together, told each other jokes, and supported each other in battle. It was a warm time with a companion by my side. Taylor McClure sat on the back of a beautiful swan. Thoughts of Ed Rossdaler came to mind. He looked at Mug, unsure if the feeling he had now was the same as before. He stood there watching Mug and said, what kind of hellish training did he go through to be acting like this now? Janica laughed and replied, because you asked me to introduce you to a good spirit, so I picked one that had made a pact with me before. Its magic power is no joke. The process was quite long. I heard there was a selection competition. In another world, Mug was racing against other spirits. Ed Rossdaler asked, who organized this? The dragon wearing sunglasses shouted, hurry up, you bunch of amateurs. Janica said, it's Tarkan. Here, take it. She handed Mug to Taylor. Mug let out a sound O. Janica, standing beside him, asked, can you feel the heat? As Taylor received Mug from Janica, his eyes lit up and he said, it's so warm. Janica continued, once you bonded with the fire spirit, even if you haven't fully summoned it yet, you can still feel its shape and magic taking form. If you're in perfect harmony, you'll start feeling hotter, so make sure to control it properly. Ed Rossdaler hesitated and asked, so if I can control the resonance, will the fire energy change too? Janica scratched her head a bit embarrassed and explained, calling it fire energy sounds a bit strange, like some kind of mechanical device. Ed Rossdaler's face turned red, his eyes sparkling. This is. Mog stood seriously in the palm of his hand and said, please give me your orders. He thought to himself, looking at it, it reminds me of a mobile kitchen. A display screen appeared. Asterisk, asterisk, fire spirit, lower rank. Mug asterisk, asterisk. Resonance level, 2. Spirit effectiveness, good. Innate ability, blessing of fire. Temporarily immune to explosive fire, can trigger a small explosion. Enhances fire magic skills. New spirit position, empty. Another display appeared showing detailed magic skill levels. Asterisk, asterisk, manage proficiency, asterisk, asterisk. Elemental specialization. Can now learn intermediate level magic. Spirit resonance level, 12. Spirit mastery level, 12. Summon spirit level, 1. Empathy level, 1. Ed Rossdaler thought to himself, this fire starter will definitely help me survive. It's super useful, and it doesn't even need wood to keep burning. Janica stood behind Ed Rossdaler, laughing as she said, I'm so glad to see you excited, Ed. You've been looking so down lately, like you just went through some kind of major disaster. Janica held her staff and continued, just let me know if you need anything else, Ed. Before class, I'll teach you about resonance and empathy. After that, if you want to train with me, that's even better. Also, you could quickly make a pact with a mid-level spirit too. Ed Rossdaler was still lost in the presence of the mug. Janica kept going. We should also practice fighting alongside spirits. I'll set aside some free time and book a training room. And there are a lot of accessories that can help boost resonance, but they're all in my room. She went on, next time we meet, well, all right. Suddenly, she covered her mouth and hesitated, saying, Ed. Hearing someone call his name, Ed Rossdaler turned around and said, huh? Janica awkwardly replied, actually, I'm really busy. I'm one of the top students in my course, you know. People are even lining up to have me teach them, so I don't have much free time. She hesitated and thought about the conversation. The dragon said, don't overdo it. Clara said, we need the salary. Janica, her voice trembling, said, so you don't think it's a bit much to ask me to teach spirit magic for free? Ed Rossdaler responded, I get it. Well, yeah, you're right. At this point, Janica was startled. Ed Rossdaler continued, I'm really sorry, Janica. He then pulled something out of his pocket and said, I took your kindness for granted. I should have been paying you for your time and effort. Though, it seems like I can't offer you an amount that would feel right. Hearing this, Janica was startled. Payment? Janica hurried over to Ed Rossdaler. Payment for what? You're still struggling to get by. How could you even think about wasting money like that? You have to be very careful with your spending. Don't waste it. I can't believe you're bringing up money. That's so cold. We're closer than that. Honestly, you're making me feel upset. Hearing Janica's words, Ed Rossdaler was taken aback, unable to believe his ears. Didn't you bring up the money issue first? What's going on with you all of a sudden? Janica hesitated, blushing as she spoke. Well, I'm so embarrassed. My fingers keep touching each other because Clara gave me some advice. No, it's not that. I think I'm just too kind, and I need to learn how to say no to people. Ed Rossdaler replied, she's right. She's a good friend. Janica reflected and said, yeah, I think so too. But as I said, she picked up her stick and turned to walk away. Not everyone gets treated as well as you do. Anyway, next time I'll be more specific. Under the sunlight, the streams of water flowed, sparkling cold beneath the sun. Janica's voice rang out, "Next time we'll meet at the combat training room. I'll book the room first and let you know later." With that, Janica cheerfully waved goodbye to Ed Rothstaler. "I'll also bring some good equipment. If you need any resonance books for your practice, just call me. I have a class in the morning, so I'll head out now. See you later." Ed Rothstaler watched Janica's figure as she waved, responding, "Oh, okay." A notification popped up. "You have unlocked advanced magic crafting techniques." He had used an advanced technique icon, represented by two interlocking gears symbolizing the skill. Ed Rothstaler picked up a device surrounded by many other components on the table. He thought about the magical technical item he had received from Lortell. It was much simpler than he had expected. Because of that, he was able to analyze it quickly. Thanks to this, he was finally able to learn a more advanced technique. Ed Rothstaler said, "Activate fire." The heater inside the room flared up again. He thought to himself, when the firewood runs out, I'll have to ask Mug to start a fire, and whenever it gets cold, we have to rely on the heater. He sat down and fed each log into the stove. Mug sat on his shoulder, watching his every move. He thought about how, in order to warm the space, there needed to be peace. A strong, secure home had been built. He looked back at the room, lit by the soft glow of the stove. It made him feel at ease. He closed his eyes as if the weight on his heart had been lifted. Then he glanced out the window. How long has it been? He wondered. He needed to check the traps. By the time I get back, it'll probably be dark. Outside, the night had already swallowed up the sky. Ed Rothstaler said, "It'll probably be tomorrow." Claire Elfin was walking alone in the forest, speaking aloud, but when I think about it, it seems like the Black Mage is behind the incident at Ulfilas Hall. Ed Rothstaler is one of my suspects. But he's been disowned by his family, so now he's just Ed, right? Alice appeared in Claire Elfin's mind. She thought everyone at the scene is either a member of the Ulfilas Hall or someone connected to it. But Taylor and Ed are the only two who don't have any ties to Ulfilas Hall. Since Taylor was involved in handling the previous situation, Ed is the only one left. As she walked, she continued thinking, I've heard that Rot Taylor often shows up in the northern forest, so I came to check it out. But unless he's eating or sleeping outdoors, there's no way he would be involved in a dark forest like this. Suddenly, she seemed to realize something terrifying. The head of an animal, covered in blood and lifeless, with eyes completely white. A tall figure was dragging the animal along the ground, and over his shoulder, he carried a person. In the darkness, Claire Elfin was terrified and quickly hid behind a nearby tree. She peeked over, thinking, what is that? It was definitely a man, cold and powerful. Claire Elfin thought of the one person even the mighty Obo leader, the great wizard Glock, and the wise Sylvania struggled to deal with. She looked toward the person on her shoulder and gasped, Lucy Merrill. Standing behind the tree, she observed everything, her mind racing with worry. It seems my instincts were right. The culprit is behind the incident that took over the lobby. The mysterious man turned his head. She saw his face clearly and felt a chill in her heart. Ed Rothstaler. Claire Elfin clamped her mouth shut, not daring to speak. She thought for a moment, and the other man was still walking forward. Claire Elfin looked at the girl being carried away. Lucy. It's definitely Lucy. She froze, gently turning to look again, and indeed, her earlier feeling had been spot on. She truly had a talent for detective work. In the dark of the night, smoke was coming out of the house's ventilation pipe. Claire Elfin wondered, what happened? Why is Lucy being carried off like that? Standing behind the tree, she watched Ed Rothstaler's every move. I can't figure out how he managed to take her down so easily. Suddenly, he dropped the reindeer to the ground. He set Lucy down and threw some kind of bat onto the ground as well. With that, he turned and walked into the cabin. Oh, now that I think about it, I have another appointment tomorrow morning, and there's still so much to do. It's already late. I should get some rest. Claire Elfin carefully watched him. She kept her eyes on Ed Rothstaler's back. She quietly tiptoed toward Lucy. Okay, I need to save Lucy first, but I have to move really slowly. Claire Elfin reached out to touch Lucy's body, thinking to herself, I can't make any noise. Suddenly, a bright light flashed from inside the tent. Claire Elfin jumped, pulled her hand back, and said, what was that? Lucy cautiously stepped out of the tent. Claire Elfin, worried, asked, Lucy, are you awake? Lucy gave Claire Elfin a cold stare. Who are you, and how did you get in here? Claire Elfin awkwardly smiled and replied, oh, I'm the professor's assistant. Then she suddenly stopped. Looking at Lucy's back as she turned away, Claire Elfin couldn't help but wonder, is she just going back to sleep in the tent like that? Suddenly, in the tent shrouded in darkness, only her purple eyes were visible. The dim light from the fire illuminated Lucy's emotionless face. Without warning, she flew up, carrying the bag from earlier, and energy radiated around her. Claire Elfin stood frozen below, staring in shock at Lucy. She was sweating, speaking exactly what she had been thinking before. Back at the academy, Claire Elfin threw the book onto the table and said loudly, "Ed Rossdaler." Claire Elfin placed her hand on the table and began to speak about what she knew. "Professor, are you aware that a student named Ed was expelled from the academy because of his actions?" Professor Glass calmly held the book in his hands and said, "What about the student being expelled? How would I know about that?" Claire Elfin responded, "It's true. Your words always catch me off guard." "Do you know a student named Lucy?" she asked. "Lucy was taken down so quickly by him. I saw him carry her over his shoulder so easily, almost effortlessly. On my way to visit Ed's tent, I witnessed the whole thing. I believe he might be behind the reason the Ophilis Hall was invaded." Upon hearing this, the professor's expression shifted slightly. "All right, if there's something you need to clarify, go ahead, Assistant Claire." Claire responded, "When defending the Ohias Hall, I was quite successful in using my magic spells there. But for some reason, the students were still able to take control of it. Someone inside must have helped them. Janica was practicing her magic, creating a large golden sphere in the center. She used her magic spells in there. Is that even allowed?" The other person answered, "I hadn't thought of it either, but it was necessary to fight against the students who were planning to cause chaos." Professor Glass calmly kept reading his book and said, "All right, I understand. If there's anything else, make sure to let me know." Claire Elfin began to explain, "Yes, basically, that's the situation, which is why I came to investigate student Ed. If you want more details, please take a look at this. All the images have been recorded here." Images of Ed Rossdaler appeared around them, exuding an ominous aura. Seeing him standing in the hall, he looked no different than a crime boss. His face was as cold as ice. Claire Elfin's voice still echoed. "With that look, I was sure he was the mastermind behind the takeover of the lobby and the chaos at the academy that night." Professor Glass casually said, "Is that all you have?" Claire Elfin leaned on the table, persistent. "Yes, and I also mentioned that the Lucy Magic Academy was taken down by him too." Professor Glass then said, "You're mistaken. Lucy, she's just someone who likes to sleep. She must have fallen asleep in the forest and probably just carried her back to the tent." At this, Claire Elfin fell silent, unable to respond. Professor Glass scolded her, "You really can't get anything right. Go rewrite your report for me." Claire Elfin left the room, her face dark. "Yes, sir." Suddenly, Professor Glass shifted his gaze to the side. From within the purple orb, he could see the future. The images of the students' invasion were captured in the magic crystal. At first glance, it seemed like Ed was trying to stop some of the students rather than having any other intention. However, the three students had managed to defeat him. Taylor, Ayla, and Alvera Initian were using offensive magic against Ed. Professor Glass thought for a moment. Taylor is a student with a natural talent for swordsmanship. Ayla is known as a student with a talent for alchemy. He pondered further. With that, Ed has almost no chance of defeating the three of them. Through the orb, he saw Ed trying to fight back with his own strength. Suddenly, his expression shifted, becoming strange. He stared into the orb, showing an expression of surprise.